Chapter 853. The bonfire burned in the mountain forest at night, dispelling the darkness and chill around it. The soft and melodious sound of the guitar rang out unhurriedly. Tents were set up around it, and more than a dozen young men and women surrounded the bonfire, enjoying a midnight snack. All of them looked like students. The combination of men and women was almost perfect. They snuggled up to each other and the scene looked extremely harmonious. At the periphery of the crowd, a handsome young man stood aside, quietly looking at the girl playing the guitar, his eyes warm and calm. The girl played the guitar, smiling gently and brightly. The night wind blew her hair and the light of the bonfire flickered. Her whole body seemed to glow. Senior, I heard that you and Xianxia plan to get married after graduation? A girl with light freckles on her face looked at the scene and asked with some envy. Your news is outdated. Another young student came over, stopped the freckled girl's shoulder and whispered with a smile, Senior, you went to see a house with the class monitor a few days ago. It's a mansion of nearly 800 square meters. We don't understand the world of the rich. You still have the cheek to say that. The freckled girl rolled her eyes at her boyfriend. When are you going to take me to see a house? I don't want 800 square meters. Do you have a small house of 80 square meters? The boy smiled and scratched his head. The house price in my hometown is not so high, so I bought a big house. My family means that I'm just living off my parents and there's nothing to be envious of. The handsome and gentle man smiled and shook his head. His eyes noticed a couple walking into the depths of the mountain forest. He frowned and was a little worried. Don't go far. It's not safe in the middle of the night. Don't worry, Senior. The girl's face was a little ruddy. She glared at her boyfriend next to her and giggled. With Xianxia here there won't be any danger. The girl playing the guitar smiled and waved her hand, full of confidence. The boy shook his head and did not say anything. The freckled girl stood there and laughed when she saw this scene. Senior, Xianxia is a martial arts master. After you get married, I'm afraid you'll be bullied by her for a lifetime. She's willing. The young man laughed softly. The class leader shouldn't have entered our school, right? I've heard that her family is very powerful and she seems to be very talented. She should have gone to Huating or Yuzhou. It's said that there's a special warfare academy there, and it's a mysterious thing. But she gave up the opportunity for her senior. Is that right? The freckled girl was curious. The young man's eyes became more and more gentle. He looked at his beloved girlfriend and did not speak. The guitar stopped playing for a moment. One more song. The surrounding young students began to cheer and applaud. The girl, whose strength was completely above everyone but was not arrogant at all, smiled shyly and gently. She glanced at her boyfriend, tilted her head and said with a smile, Let's play another song. The guitar continued to play amidst the applause. The girl's voice was ethereal and sweet. On the banyan tree by the pond, she sang softly, but her sweet voice stopped abruptly in an instant. Everyone looked at her in surprise. The girl named Xiaoxue's face instantly turned extremely pale. Her gentle eyes suddenly became extremely frightened, and her whole expression seemed to be a little distorted. The young man who noticed the scene walked directly to her without thinking. What's wrong? Look, a meteor. The freckled girl suddenly pointed to the sky and cried. Everyone raised their heads. The night sky seemed to brighten for a moment. Through the sparse winter forest at the end of the sight, a ray of light suddenly crossed the sky. No one knew how far it was. But everyone noticed the ray of light. The bright moon and the bright stars all seemed to dim at the moment when the ray of light appeared. The ray of light seemed to tear the sky apart and kept flashing at an unimaginable speed. The meteor crossed the night sky. The next moment, the ray of light had flown over their heads from the very distant night sky. A colorful line seemed to be vaguely left behind in the night sky. The next second, the ray of light went away in a flash and disappeared directly from everyone's sight. So beautiful. After an unknown period of time, someone murmured softly. Then his body subconsciously trembled. Everyone suddenly felt so cold. The whole forest and the whole world seemed to be filled with a kind of ghastly coldness. The girl named Xiaoxue, who should have entered the Sky Academy or the Deep Sea Academy a few years ago, collapsed in her boyfriend's arms and had no strength at all. The meteor had passed. But her eyes were still terrified to the extreme and she couldn't say a word. Ordinary people might just feel very cold. But she knew very well what this coldness meant. This was sharpness. Unparalleled sharpness. Yan and Zhao valued martial arts. As a barrier near Yuzhou, Yan and Zhao's martial arts had always played a very important role in Zhongzhou state. One of the double walls of Sai City, Drifting Cloud, the director of Yuzhou Special Operations Bureau. Hua Qingfeng, the sect master of the Shadow Sect. Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master of Mount Shu. The enchantress of the Wang family of Beihai. And so on. Many of the roles of the backbone of the special warfare system in Zhongzhou state were from Yan and Zhao. Yan and Zhao did not have a famous martial arts force in the Dark World like Jade Pool and Mount Shu. But in such a large province there were many martial arts families. The masters of the families were at least experts at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, and many of them were in the thunder-shocking realm. When these people gathered together, their strength was extremely impressive. The martial arts of Jade Pool and Mount Shu was about cultivation. But the martial arts of Yan and Zhao was about competition. All the qualified martial arts families in Yan and Zhao province would have a competition every once in a while. This was also the famous elite martial arts competition in Yan and Zhao. To be exact, it was held every 3 years. And the time of the competition was at the end of the 2 academies, which was the winter of the year before graduation. The elite martial arts competition would select some of the top winners and send them to the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. There was no threshold for the competition. Regardless of life or death, everyone who knew the news was qualified to participate. The scene was huge, but it was extremely chaotic and time-consuming. But this was the way Yan and Zhao had always selected the top elites. In Shanghai City, the elite martial arts competition had lasted for nearly a day. From day to night, the selection of good and bad had come to an end. The rest was the battle between the elites. On the edge of the huge martial arts arena, the patriarchs of many families sat there with different expressions, waiting for the judges to count the results. In the middle of the patriarchs, an old man looked at his grandson standing in front of him with a smile and whispered, "You did well today. Keep it up." "Yes." The young man nodded calmly. "Junzi is really good. In this generation his strength can be regarded as the top and he is no worse than his brother." A middle-aged patriarch beside the old man smiled and said, "By the way, Junzi, I heard that your brother is doing well in Emperor Dong's palace? Is he going to break through to the peak of the fire-flaming realm?" He turned to the old man with an imperceptible flattery in his eyes and said with a smile, "Mr. Qi, when your grandson becomes a senior in Emperor Dong's palace, don't forget us ordinary people." "Don't say that. Haha, in terms of martial arts talent, the 2 brothers are really—" The old man's laughter suddenly stopped, and the next moment he suddenly jumped up. His movement was so violent that he staggered and almost fell to the ground. A few seconds later, almost all the patriarchs of the aristocratic families stood up in shock and looked at the sky in the distance. There was a light in the distant night sky. From south to north, the bright and almost dazzling light kept flashing in the sky. One second it was on the southern edge of the city. The next second, it had directly penetrated the sky above the entire city. The sharpness that could tear the sky and the earth passed the martial arts practice field in an instant with awe-inspiring coldness. That was indescribable majesty and arrogance. At this moment, all the patriarchs of the martial arts families in Yan and Zhao froze on the spot and did not dare to move. From south to north, the light almost flew over the sky of Shanghai City in an instant and then disappeared in the distance. The whole martial arts practice field was dead silent. Everyone was immersed in the flash of light. It was not shock. It was real fear. When fear reached the extreme, all the senses would become extremely pure. There were people at the peak of the fire-flaming realm, at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and Mr. Qi was an expert a half-step to the invincible realm. However, everyone only had one thought when facing that ray of light. Their pride and willpower seemed to be completely shattered under the light that could tear the sky and the earth. Everyone only had one feeling. Small. Just like a real non-entity. If the height of that light was lower, the unparalleled sharpness could tear the whole city apart. What is that?" A patriarch struggled to open his mouth, and his hoarse voice shocked even himself. "I don't know," Mr. Qi, who had the highest realm, said. Then he shook his head and said in a deep voice, "The invincible realm." He said the invincible realm. Not the invincible realm. The meteor flew through the sky and went straight into the sea. Shanghai City was left far behind in an instant. The dazzling light kept flashing, splitting the surface of the sea. Amidst the monstrous waves, each flash of light traversed an incomparably long distance. Yanzhao quickly fell behind. The light was extremely bright and unimaginable. It entered Qin Island with extreme brilliance. The glorious night view of Qin Island passed in an instant. The more dazzling light flew over Dongshan province. Flashing and trembling. A perfectly straight afterimage appeared in the sky. The light in front was more and more dazzling. The target of the flowing light was clear and direct. It flew over the mountains, the wilderness, the plains, the city and the sea and went straight into the hinterland of Dongshan. Far in the distance, a bright light lit up. At the extreme speed, the faint light in the distance suddenly became bright. It wasn't a big city. Under the blurred lights, the whole city looked so leisurely that it was almost unorganized. This inland city was called Qingzhou. The flowing light flashed and suddenly became extremely dazzling. It was so small but so dazzling as if it had the supreme glory. In the next second, almost everyone in the city of Qingzhou saw this ray of light. The light crossed the sky with thousands of meters of light and directly covered the whole city in the blink of an eye. Falling stars and falling moons. It was extremely dazzling. It disappeared in an instant. There had never been such a majestic and dazzling light in the world. The brilliant sword light was unparalleled in the world. Chapter 854. The whole Qingzhou city was in an uproar. The light was so bright and gorgeous that it covered the stars and illuminated the night sky. The bright lights and neon lights were completely dimmed. It flew across the sky and suddenly seemed to be the only color in the world. Then it disappeared over Qingzhou city. Or rather, it fell. Everyone was extremely curious about what it was and where it came from, and why it disappeared over Qingzhou. The process was extremely short. But someone happened to take a photo. In the vast night sky, the colorful light appeared in the photo, and it seemed to amaze the whole world. As a senior astronomy enthusiast, He Yishui could be said to be one of the first people to discover the light. She saw the light through the telescope she bought with a lot of money. It was so clear and yet so blurry. The professional telescope barely captured the constantly flashing picture of the light. She couldn't see what was in the light, but she could appreciate its posture more clearly than most people. It was as if it was gliding through the night sky with grace and speed. Every time the light flickered, it would cross thousands of meters of the night sky, leaving an unimaginable trail of light in the air. It was moving forward in a straight line, so focused and so persistent. The light flashed and disappeared in an instant. He Yishui was a little upset and then she became a little excited. She picked up her mobile phone, opened the address book and sent a voice message to her best friend. Mudong, did you see that? That meteor is so beautiful. It should be a very rare meteorite. I have a video here. If you didn't see it, I'll send you a copy. Li Mutong on the other end of the phone did not respond. Because the meteor was standing in front of her at this time. He Yishui might be one of the first people to discover the meteor. But she was definitely not the first person to feel the meteor. Wang Yuetong was. Or in other words, a few thunder-shocking realm experts in Qingzhou were the first people to feel the meteor. It was not a meteor. It was sword light. Pure sword light. The sword light was so condensed, pure and perfect. It flew over Qingzhou city. Li Mutong felt the terrible oppression and coldness at the first time. In front of this sharp edge that seemed to be able to easily tear everything apart, she did not have any thoughts of resisting. She had never been to Eastern Europe, nor had she seen the real heavenly sun of the world. Her perception might not be accurate, but the Howren sword light that flashed across the sky seemed to have surpassed her father's in her memory. Her eyes widened in horror and her face turned pale. The little girl named Tide was sleeping soundly in her arms. She was gently wrapping her fingers around herself. Through the window of the living room, she saw the sword light flying directly toward her house. The windows in the living room were instantly shattered. There was no clear sound. The sturdy glass instantly turned into the finest powder without a sound. The sword light flew into the living room and appeared in front of her. Li Mutong's body tensed up and she subconsciously hugged her daughter tightly in her arms. Her mind was in a mess. She bit her lips and didn't know what to say. She couldn't figure out how the other party had found him. He didn't know who the other party was. He had no idea what the other party was here for. Her eyes trembled slightly. Holding the child in her arms, she finally became determined. There was a black shadow in her sight. The rainbow-colored light was slowly dispersing around him. The black shadow became clearer and clearer. It seemed to be a person, but his entire body was wrapped in a long black trench coat, and the black trench coat was covered with the black trench coat was embroidered with countless complicated and gorgeous golden patterns. A big hood covered his head. Li Mutong could only see the coat. It could be said to be the most gorgeous and majestic coat she had ever seen. But she couldn't see the person in the coat. She bit her lips, holding the child, and looked at him stubbornly. Her eyes gradually calmed down and they were a little gloomy. The black shadow was also silent. His eyes fell on the little girl in her arms and he was motionless. It seemed like he was surprised, stunned, dazed, and nothing at all. She couldn't feel any emotion from him. He seemed to be emotionless, quiet, indifferent, and steady like the deep sea or the abyss. "Who are you?" Li Mutong asked slowly. Her voice was calm and clear without a trace of trembling. The black shadow moved and took 2 steps forward. "If you take 1 step forward, I promise you will only see 2 dead bodies." Wang Yuetong said calmly, "I don't know who you are and I don't know what you want to do. But you can't get anything from me and you can't use me to threaten my family and him." She held the daughter in her arms with deep sorrow in her eyes, but she became more and more determined. The black shadow froze on the spot and he seemed to be at a loss. Li Mutong was stunned. In her sight, the black shadow slowly raised his palm. His movement was very slow. Maybe he was afraid of causing some misunderstanding, so he was very careful. With a slight tearing sound, a finger-sized hole appeared on Li Mutong's leader. A glimmer of light left Li Mutong's leader and stayed on the black shadow's sleeve. The pale silver light kept spinning and jumping in the black shadow's hand. It was extremely eager and excited and it seemed that it couldn't wait. Li Mutong looked at the pendant she had been wearing for almost 2 years, and her heart suddenly ached. However, her body gradually relaxed. Because of the pendant's reaction. "Are you one of his people?" She forced a smile, looked at the silver light jumping on the black shadow's sleeve and said softly, "It does belong to him. If he wants to take it back, you can take it." The heart-breaking sword of the 13-story building. 2 years ago he put the heart-breaking sword on her and it had never left him until now. Li Mutong watched it fly into someone else's hand. She was in a daze and no one knew what she was thinking. The black shadow lowered his head and looked at the heart-breaking sword in his hand. At this moment, Li Mutong could clearly feel his emotions from him. It was hesitation, and longing. The black shadow moved and seemed to look at her, then at the heart-breaking sword and then at her again. After repeating this for nearly 5 minutes, he raised his palm. The delicate heart-breaking sword floated in the air, shining with silver light, beautiful and cold. A subtle but extremely strong light appeared in the black shadow's palm. The light wrapped the heart-breaking sword. The shattered heart, which had been trembling all this while, suddenly stopped. The exquisite little sword suddenly emitted an incomparably sharp aura. As if it had been waking up from a long sleep, the sword energy of the heart-breaking sword was extremely strong in an instant. The black shadow looked at the heart-breaking sword. The heart-breaking sword moved slowly and carefully, stopping in front of Wang Yuetong. "What do you mean?" Li Mutong looked at him in surprise. "It belongs to him. I don't need it. You can take it away." The black shadow was silent and motionless, just looking at her quietly. The black clothes wrapped him so tightly that Li Mutong couldn't hear his voice or see his expression. She only saw him raise his sleeve and point at the child in her arms. "Tide is my daughter." Wang Yuetong suddenly screamed and held the child tightly. It seemed that because she was holding the child too hard, Tide's little body trembled slightly, and she struggled to cry. The black shadow was obviously a little flustered. He raised both sleeves and waved them randomly. A stream of air appeared in the living room. The gentle and steady stream wrapped the little girl. Li Mutong stretched out her palm. Tide, who was in distress, came directly to the black shadow. "No." Li Mutong seemed to have completely broken down in an instant. "Give my child back to me." Her voice was a little desperate with a hint of pleading. The black shadow looked down at Tide. The big one and the little one looked at each other. From this angle, the little girl seemed to be able to see his face. No one knew what the little girl saw. Tide's crying gradually disappeared, and then she giggled very happily. The black shadow bent down and looked at Tide floating in the air. He hesitated and raised a finger. Li Mutong looked at this scene nervously. His finger slowly moved down and finally fell on the little girl's eyebrows. A perfect and dreamy light suddenly bloomed from his finger. The light enveloped the whole living room. Wang Yuetong stood up subconsciously, trying in vain to stop something. Tide's laughter was still ringing in her ears. In the colorful light it looked extremely dreamy. The light expanded and then faded away quickly. Tide's laughter didn't stop and he sounded extremely happy. Li Mutong's palm slightly sank. The little girl returned to her arms and a little hand grabbed her neckline. Li Mutong was relieved and held the little girl tightly. The light disappeared completely. The black shadow was still standing there. His aura had obviously dropped by a notch. Li Mutong was stunned and looked down at her daughter in her arms. There was a tiny but extremely beautiful mark left between the little girl's eyebrows. It was like an almost imperceptible diamond-shaped crystal, shining with colorful light in the light. Her fingers gently touched the crystal and she felt warmth. But inside the crystal she clearly sensed a sharpness that could destroy everything. If this was an amulet, it could be said that this amulet was unique in the whole dark world. Wang Yuetong looked at the black shadow in a daze. She couldn't refuse such a gift because from this moment on her daughter had a power that no one could hurt her. Her rosy lips moved and she whispered, "Thank you." The black shadow, whose breath had obviously dropped, stood there blankly. He didn't look tired and he just quietly looked at Tide in Li Mutong's arms. "Don't tell him." Li Mutong whispered, "I'm begging you. Don't tell him." The little girl in Wang Yuetong's arms giggled and reached out her little hand toward the black shadow, as if she wanted to grab him. The black shadow took a few steps back. Li Mutong was stunned and stood up subconsciously. In her sight, the black shadow backed out of the broken window and suddenly fell from the 5th floor. That gorgeous black windbreaker spread out in the air to its heart's content. The 4th floor, the 3rd floor, the 2nd floor. Flashing. A stream of dazzling flowing light suddenly lit up the entire Qingzhou. The flowing light flew high in the sky and appeared in the sky that Li Mutong could see. Then it flashed again and instantly left the Qingzhou city. All the way to the north. Chapter 855. Zhongzhou state was moving. Beihai was also moving. The real chaos began when North Sea wiped out all foreign forces. Wang Xingxiao's statement that those who entered the border of Beihai would die fully explained what it meant to say that attack was the best defense. The fall of the 4 major generals was just the beginning. The ubiquitous undercurrents had quietly swept across the entire North Sea. Blood, battles, conspiracies, and betrayals began to play out sporadically in every corner of the North Sea. Wang Xiaoyao had let go of his scruples and began to fight with all his strength. The strength he had accumulated for many years began to be exposed little by little. Not only Mount Dibbing but also the 7 major sword-holding families could clearly feel that there would be big and small problems in a certain link of his orders. In the eyes of ordinary people, Beihai was still calm. But those who stood at the top could clearly see the turmoil and chaos. Orders to recall experts from all over the world were sent out one after another. More and more experts returned to the North Sea. There were teams, individuals, and all sorts of talents. Little by little, the foundation of North Sea was being exposed. It was not the madness of a dying struggle. All the actions were orderly. Beihai was getting more and more chaotic, but the actions on Mount Dibbing were clear and definite from the beginning, with a kind of beauty of order. As the only and last disciple of Xie Huangfu Qiushui, the daughter of this generation of the Huangfu family, was also officially summoned back to the North Sea. This girl, who once had the courage to fight with Li Tianlan at the same realm, had now become an influential figure in the Sky Academy and the Deep Sea Academy. Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao were equally young. But the world had changed and they were already standing on the highest stage facing countless sabers and swords, and hidden thunder above the 9th heaven. They were very young but they were already somewhat out of touch with true youth. When the influential figures of the past reached the pinnacle, there would always be younger people to replace their positions. Huangfu Qiushui was one of the best. At the age of 20, she was at the peak of the fire-flaming realm. In both academies of Zhongzhou state, she could be said to be a veritable goddess-like figure. Huangfu Qiushui did not return to Beihai alone. Instead, she brought along a small team she had set up in the Sky Academy. The team was called Kuanglan. The word Lan had caused a huge controversy in the Huangfu family, but Huangfu Qiushui had also displayed an extremely tough attitude. She didn't care what others said and directly decided on the name. Currently there were only 7 people in the Wild Tide squad. 5 Fire-Flaming Realm experts. 2 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts. The one with the highest realm had already stabilized the realm of the Thunder-Shocking realm. But the number 1 expert of the Wild Tide squad had always been the captain Huangfu Qiushui, who had not yet entered the Thunder-Shocking realm. The whole team came to Beihai. If there were no accidents, the Violent Squad would also become part of the Beihai Corps after graduation. All the internal members would change their household registration and become a member of Beihai. They would be completely absorbed by the Beihai Corps. Huangfu Qiushui would also move up in the Beihai Corps. In the future, if she wasn't the patriarch of the Huangfu family, she would definitely become a Corps senior who controlled all the forces of the Huangfu family. The Violent Squad would become the core force of the Huangfu family and have nothing to do with Zhongzhou state from then on. From a certain point of view, Qin Fangqing was right to think that Beihai was a cancer of Zhongzhou state. Because over the years, Beihai had indeed taken a lot of things from Zhongzhou state, including technology, talents, and resources. Although they had also given Zhongzhou state generous returns, it had been going on for too long. Whether it was fair or not depended on one's mentality. A situation similar to the Violent Tide squad would happen to the graduates of each session of the 2 academies. Before the appearance of Emperor Dong's palace, Beihai had always been a popular choice for many elites. Zhongzhou state carefully cultivated elites, and a large number of people would enter Beihai every session. Their popularity was even higher than that of Kunlun City. Among such a team, Huangfu Qiushui's Violent Tide squad could be said to be the most outstanding one. It was also the most blatant one. They returned to Mount Dibing as soon as they received the order. Then they returned to Qiushui City from Mount Dibing. The task of the Kanglin squad was very simple. They helped the Huangfu family to stabilize the order of Qiushui City in the worst case. The worst case, Huangfu Qiushui thought for a whole day. She only thought of 2 words. The worst. Wang Xingxiao told her the worst. She was the disciple of Summer Solstice. She could be said to be Wang Xingxiao's junior sister. It might not be appropriate to call her junior sister, but Wang Xingxiao, who had spent most of her time in Mount Dibing, undoubtedly regarded her as his sister. Therefore Wang Xingxiao explained the conversation between them very thoroughly. The word worst also brought her endless pressure. In her memory, even throughout the history of Beihai, the so-called worst case was rare, and it could even be said that it had never happened before. What had Zhongzhou state thought about? How fierce would the so-called game be this time? She returned to Qiushui City and her family and thought for nearly a day and a night. The night was about to pass. Huangfu Qiushui, who hadn't slept all night, was a little sleepy, but her mind was still confused. She shook her head hard, got up, put on her clothes and walked out of the door. Outside the door it was an extremely secluded little courtyard. The 2 Thunder-Shocking Realm experts of the Violent Tide squad were guarding the door, seemingly acting as bodyguards. Seeing Huangfu Qiushui come out, the older man with the highest realm turned around reflexively and said, "Captain, go and have a rest." Huangfu Qiushui said quietly. Her voice was a little distant with a sense of distance. "Where do you want to go, Captain? Let me accompany you?" The man scratched his head and laughed. His code name, Guardian, was given by himself and he changed it the moment he saw Huangfu Qiushui. He had never concealed his crazy infatuation and pursuit of Huangfu Qiushui, but Huangfu Qiushui always kept a distance from him. Relatively speaking, her attitude toward the other team members was closer than that of Guardian. "I'm going to the family ancestral hall," Huangfu Qiushui said blandly. When she said the ancestral hall, she seemed to think of something. Her light and almost holy face blushed slightly, and she subconsciously raised one hand to touch her face. Guardian's eyes were hot and almost obsessed. He also wanted to touch her face. His greatest wish was even to be able to touch Huangfu Qiushui's face. But as soon as his fingers moved, he withdrew them awkwardly. Huangfu Qiushui noticed his eyes, frowned slightly and said in a cold voice, "Get out of the way." Guardian took a step back in embarrassment. Huangfu Qiushui walked past him and her footsteps were a little hurried. The family ancestral hall was the only place she could think of that could calm her heart. Guardian took a deep breath, looked at Huangfu Qiushui's back and his eyes were a little sad. "You're a toad trying to eat swan meat. You're lucky to live until now and you still want to hit on the captain here? I'm afraid you haven't woken up yet." Another expert of the Thunder-Shocking realm in the Wild Billow squad laughed. "What do you mean hit on the captain? I like her and that's my right. You should have forgotten the captain's sword, the thunder-shocking realm member said with a faint smile. His code name was Songlei. Different from Guardian, he joined the Wild Billow Squad to join the Wang family of Beihai. His biggest dream was to make a name for himself in the Beihai Corps. Guardian narrowed his eyes and said blandly, "The captain is really strong. But I'm close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm." He was close to the peak of the thunder-shocking realm at the age of less than 30. In any case, he could be regarded as a genius. This was also the reason why he dared to express his love for Huangfu Qiushui. At his age and today's achievements, no one dared to say that he had no hope of reaching the half-step invincible realm or even the invincible realm in the future. Idiot. Songlei curled his lips. I'm talking about the captain's sword, not her strength. Don't you know the characteristics of the Wang family of Beihai's martial arts? Today's patriarch is very strong, but he's strong in the wind and thunder veins. Beihai's martial arts focus on momentum and the foundation. How much strength can a normal expert of the fire-flaming realm exert? Unless they're in an explosive state, which is the characteristic of Beihai's martial arts. If time goes back, even His Majesty Wang Tianzong would not be her opponent at the captain's age. Pure Beihai's martial arts should still be stabilizing the foundation at the captain's age. What are you trying to say? Guardian frowned. Haven't you heard that rumor? Songlei's smile was a little weird. He was from Beihai. Although he didn't belong to a sword-holding family, his family was considered to be above average in Qiushui City, so he knew the truth of some rumors. The foundation of the captain's martial arts is in Beihai, but today's kendo is approaching that which is different from Beihai's martial arts. Guardian's face changed slightly and then he forced a sneer. Hearsay. Don't forget my background. Songlei's tone was a little superior. He glanced at his companion and said playfully, I heard that when that person swept Beihai 2 years ago, his first battle was with Qiushui. The first sword left by that person was left in the ancestral hall of the Huangfu family. Captain is going to the ancestral hall now. What do you think she's going to do? When that person swept through the North Sea, Captain followed him for a period of time. I heard that His Highness was very optimistic about Captain. Who knows if it was because of her talent or something else. Hey, that's why I said that you're lucky to be alive until now. Guardian clenched his teeth. His face was livid and a little pale. With a slight sound, Huangfu Qiushui pushed open the door of the ancestral hall. The faint but awe-inspiring sword energy came to her face. It was a little cold, but Huangfu Qiushui was very familiar with it. There might be thousands of rumors, but there was always one that was right. That was Huangfu Qiushui had indeed gradually moved in another direction from Beihai's martial arts. In 2 years her physical fitness was unlikely to support her to enter the thunder-shocking realm, so she spent most of her time simulating, imitating and then practicing continuously. Many people felt that her sword energy and fighting style were becoming more and more like Li Tianlan's. This sentence was right but not completely right. Most of the time she imitated the sword intent of Tianguang's sword. Tianguang's sword was left in the ancestral hall by Li Tianlan. It was a part of the 13-story building with Li Tianlan's sword energy on it. The perfect integration of the two was as profound as the sky and the sea for Huangfu Qiushui. Her increasingly fierce sword energy was an imitation of the sword energy on Tianguang's sword. She occasionally thought of the man who could carelessly touch her face with his feet. Thinking of his sword light and his rudeness when he conquered Sister Yuetong in front of her for the last time, she had mixed feelings. But here she could indeed calm down in the fastest time. She took a step forward and closed the door of the ancestral hall. Buzz. In the subtle sound, the quiet Tianguang sword trembled slightly, looking a little happy. Huangfu Qiushui was a little curious and took a step forward subconsciously. A black shadow suddenly appeared in her line of sight. Huangfu Qiushui was startled. Her whole body suddenly tensed up, surrounded by sword energy as if facing a formidable enemy. The black shadow stood in front of Tianguang's sword with his back to her. The gorgeous and mysterious black windbreaker looked extremely majestic. His palm seemed to be touching the hilt of Tianguang's sword. Huangfu Qiushui didn't know when the other party came in. She didn't even know why she didn't notice the other party just now. The other party had his back to her and was quiet. Huangfu Qiushui subconsciously shifted her gaze. The black shadow was still there, but it disappeared in her perception in an instant. It was extremely illusory. It was as if it really was a phantom. Huangfu Qiushui naturally knew what it meant. It meant that the other party was at least an unimaginable master for her. In people's impression in the entire dark world, there seemed to be only one person who could do this. Li Kuangtu of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. He was more real than heaven and earth but more illusory than the air. You are. Huangfu Qiushui gritted her teeth and asked slowly. The black shadow moved and slowly turned around. He raised his head. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly opened her eyes, which were full of spiritual energy. Her eyes were a little nervous, but there was also a kind of joy and surprise that she might not even be aware of. Under the black hood, in the slightly swaying candlelight in the ancestral hall, there was an extremely young and clean face. His appearance was a little blurred in the dim light, but it could still be seen that he was not handsome. That clean face could only be said to be delicate. The most eye-catching thing was his temperament. That was an indescribable temperament. At this moment, there were only 4 words in Huangfu Qiushui's mind. Peerless beauty. It turned out that a man could also be described as peerless beauty. He was like the sun, dazzling. In the dark ancestral hall, his whole body seemed to be shining, perfect like a dream. Huangfu Qiushui looked at him in a daze, and suddenly remembered the scene when she squatted in front of him and wiped his feet for him 2 years ago. She remembered that the other party rubbed her face with his feet. It was a little moist, a little warm, and a very humiliating action, but she didn't feel humiliated at all. Huangfu Qiushui's eyes were a little intoxicated, then turned into astonishment, slowly into surprise, and finally became unfamiliar. That face was still so clear. But she seemed to be sure of something. You are not Li Tianlan. She whispered. The face in her sight was indeed Li Tianlan. His figure and appearance were exactly the same. But what was different was that he was too eye-catching. In her impression, Li Tianlan was very calm, but in his calmness, there was a strong sense of confidence and desire or ambition. And the Li Tianlan in front of her, he was also very calm. But his calmness was extremely indifferent, with a kind of real indifference and carelessness. Huangfu Qiushui could feel the arrogance behind this calmness. Extreme arrogance. It was a kind of look that looked at everyone as an ant. Peaceful, indifferent, dignified, superior, insufferably arrogant and supercilious. It was an indescribable overbearing, restrained to the extreme, but it made people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. In her sight, Li Tianlan shook his head and then nodded. He could understand her words. His current appearance might not be the current Li Tianlan. But it was Dong Huang in the deepest part of his memory. Dong Huang at his peak. Huangfu Qiushui glanced at him blankly, and then subconsciously looked at the skylight beside him. The skylight seemed to have completely dimmed. The sword energy belonging to Li Tianlan was still there. But the sword energy belonging to the 13th floor became extremely weak. Huangfu Qiushui was slightly shocked and suddenly turned her head. What did you do to him? It was completely silent. Huangfu Qiushui's hair suddenly stood on end. There was nothing in her sight. Except for the skylight and candlelight. There was only a row of spirit tablets of the Qiushui family. And Li Tianlan, whom she had just seen, had long disappeared. Huangfu Qiushui suddenly rushed out of the ancestral hall. At the same time she rushed out of the ancestral hall. The black shadow had left Qiushui City and came to the front of the old site of the Qin clan in Port Tongtian. There was also a sword here. Chapter 856. The former site of the Qin clan was the Painting Mountain. For hundreds of years, the Qin clan, with its prosperous population and talented people, had been one of the top 7 sword-holding families. But it was also the family that suffered the most when Li Tianlan swept across Beihai. The captives of the Li family captured by the Qin clan at that time completely infuriated Li Tianlan. One sword split the mountain. The towering platform of the Qin clan was smashed by Li Tianlan. Since then, the status of the Qin clan among the 7 sword-holding families plummeted and could not recover to its former glory. Today, the Qin clan temporarily moved to a manor on the outskirts of the port of Tongtian. Although it was still luxurious, it was completely different from the past. The divine weapon of the 13-story building was inserted in the former site of the Painting Mountain. Under the dark night, the divine weapon stood quietly on the top of the barren Painting Mountain, bathed in the moonlight, looking cold and proud. The black shadow stood in front of the divine weapon, its cuff gently touching the hilt of the divine weapon. The blade of the divine weapon had a touch of blood-like red, which looked shocking. The black shadow's cuff slowly rubbed, feeling the energy of the divine weapon recovered in 2 years, and the motionless figure looked more and more quiet. The energy of the divine weapon gradually recovered, lit up little by little. The light enshrouded the entire sword, and the delicate sword looked extremely strange. The red light completely enveloped the black shadow and the sword. After a long time, the black shadow slowly took a step forward. The divine weapon still stood there, but the sword intent was much weaker than before. The black shadow, who had been silent, patted the divine weapon as if to say hello. Its cuff fell down and the figure disappeared instantly. The gradually absorbed energy began to make its will clearer and clearer. His actions gradually got rid of the most primitive instinct. He had a lot of things to do tonight. Kanglin. Qiushui had the sky, Tongtian had the divine weapon, Kanglin had the void, the floating island had the shadow, and Liuli had the horizon. The Empress had the East Emperor and Xingzhou had the judgment. Just like Qingzhou had the broken heart. It could clearly feel the state of every sword in the entire Beihai province. The black shadow kept flashing in the night sky from south to north. Without the bright sword light across the sky of Zhongzhou state, its arrival seemed extremely low-key. In the darkest time before dawn, the transport plane from Tianan to Beijiang approached the desert. The black shadow that was patrolling the North Sea also stepped into Xingzhou city and stood in front of Ruling Sword. No one in the Wu family, who was on guard 24 hours a day, discovered its existence. Judgment's energy, which was like a sword intent, was slowly absorbed by it. To some extent, such an approach was tantamount to the murderous weapon accumulating energy for itself. His hand left the hilt of verdict. The judgment sword trembled slightly and its light dimmed a lot. A faint arc of light flashed in the dark space. An old man with white hair suddenly appeared in front of Ruling Sword. He carefully stared at the verdict in front of him. His eyes were solemn and he was silent for a long time. The black shadow casually glanced at him and ignored him. This old man was very strong. He seemed to have noticed the change in Judgment Sword's aura and rushed over. But to the black shadow it was meaningless. Meaningless meant that there was no threat. The black shadow slowly rose into the air. The night was dark. The black windbreaker fluttered in the air, completely blending into the deep night. He stood above Ruling Sword and looked in the direction of Mount Dibbing. Under the black hood, the face that was not handsome but extremely perfect gradually revealed a somewhat puzzled expression. It knew there was another sword on Mount Dibbing. But now it couldn't sense the specific state of that sword. It frowned. An invisible wave with pure energy kept spreading toward Mount Dibbing. It was windy in the North Sea. The wind moved the sea and blew up the waves. The surging tide beat on the cliff of the stage of formidable person. The sword energy, which was as majestic as the starry sky, rose with the sea and moved with the wind. It brought an extremely vague tide in the void, isolating everything on the stage of formidable person in an instant. Everything on the stage of formidable person. Wang Xingxiao sat in front of the stone of formidable person, immersed in the deepest level of meditation. His heart was extremely quiet and joyful. This feeling was indescribable. There seemed to be a road leading to the end of martial arts in front of him. He ran forward crazily on the road all the way without stopping or hindrance. He had a panoramic view of all the scenery along the way. Every sprint under his feet was on the ground. He made rapid progress. As he was enveloped by the tide, he could feel every single tremble of the sword energy. It was like a chosen one standing at the end of martial arts was standing in front of him, constantly waving his sword when his heart was at its most tranquil. Little by little, the chosen one imparted his sword intent to him without any reservation. Grand, subtle, whole, scattered, everything without any reservation. The sword energy at the end of martial arts was almost put in pieces in front of him for him to learn, improve and imitate. What Wang Xingxiao felt was only progress. That was a kind of progress that was almost crazy. In the final maneuver 2 years ago, he lowered his realm and made him leave the peak of the thundershocking realm for a long time. It also brought him great gains. When Eastern Europe was in chaos, he was once again close to the peak of the thundershocking realm. At this time, the road ahead was completely clear. He didn't have to explore by himself. The only thing he could do was to sprint. So he re-entered the peak of the thundershocking realm as soon as possible. This was a realm that he was once very familiar with. This could not even be called a breakthrough. The distant and supreme sword chi pulled him along as he kept charging forward. No one knew that in this short time, Wang Xingxiao had officially broken through the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and entered the half-step invincible realm. Wang Xingxiao was 27 years old this year. When most of his peers were still struggling to enter the fire-flaming realm from the ice-condensing realm, he broke through the threshold of the peak of the thunder-shocking realm and was only one step away from the real invincible realm. At the age of 27 he had the wind and thunder veins and the top inheritance of Beihai. He was a half-step invincible realm expert. Wang Xingxiao didn't tell anyone the news. He completely suppressed everything about himself, quietly waiting for the outbreak of the war, waiting to give everyone a surprise. What did it mean to be a half-step invincible realm expert with the wind and thunder veins? Wang Xingxiao could be sure that his current realm might still be a little unstable, but he should not be weaker than Dijiang before he broke through the invincible realm. That was to say, no matter which era he could stand at the peak of the invincible realm. At this level he might still be at the bottom, but he was also one of the youngest people. The real invincible realm was within reach. The only thing that stood in his way was his age, or rather his physical quality. He still chose to meditate on the stage of formidable person every day. The incredible sword energy became clearer and clearer in front of him. His realm didn't change, but his understanding of sword energy and sword intent was getting stronger every moment. He also gradually understood what he was going to do. The long night didn't end. The dawn hadn't arrived. Wang Xingxiao, who was meditating, slowly opened his eyes. With him as the center, all the sword energy that he had condensed for a whole night began to spread out without reservation. The thick sword energy tide in the distance whistled over with the wind and tide. Wang Xingxiao looked ahead. It was snowing in Xingzhou. The heavy snow was dancing in the sea breeze and the whistling sword energy. Wang Xingxiao took a deep breath and carefully controlled his sword energy, slowly merging it with the tide of sword energy. Bit by bit. The process was slow, but it was extremely smooth. The moment the sword energy touched the tide, the momentum of the tide suddenly weakened a lot, and Wang Xingxiao's aura became a lot stronger in an instant. The increase and decrease seemed to be perfect. But a gap suddenly appeared in the perfect sword energy that covered the stage of formidable person. A gap that most people, including experts of the invincible realm, could hardly detect. Wang Xingxiao slowly relaxed and then suddenly opened his eyes in shock. In the sky above Xingzhou, the black windbreaker fluttering in the night suddenly straightened. The gorgeous wind. The windbreaker seemed to be frozen in the night sky in an instant. Under the black hood, Li Tianlan's somewhat illusory face suddenly became extremely real. He looked in the direction of Mount Dibing, and for the first time, there was a touch of emotion in his deep eyes. It looked like anger. The anger was very light. But there was a kind of fierceness and killing intent in it, as if the world was falling apart. The wind and snow in Xingzhou grew stronger. The world became colder. On the black windbreaker, the complicated golden patterns began to shimmer. His figure directly appeared in the night sky from the most illusory state. The old man who was observing the judgment suddenly looked up at the black shadow floating above him. His body was stiff. In the sky full of killing intent and wind and snow, he couldn't say a word. The black shadow in his sight was so clear. He could feel its anger and killing intent. It floated in the air like a real emperor. Those who obey me will prosper, and those who oppose me will die. The tide and sword energy on Mount Dibing merged. The silver moon on the stone of formidable person trembled slightly. Above Xingzhou, the black shadow floated up for a moment. Among the old man underground, his figure flickered and disappeared instantly. In a trance, the darkness dissipated. The entire Xizhou city saw the light. The colorful sword light was more dazzling than the scorching sun. The sword light tore an arc of tens of thousands of meters long over Xingzhou. It cut the night sky and seemed to bring dawn and morning. The next second, it appeared directly over Mount Dibing. At the moment when the day and night alternated, a rainbow appeared in the sky. The rainbow spanned Xingzhou and Mount Dibing. The sword intent was mighty and earth-shattering. The rainbow-like sword light didn't destroy any building on Mount Dibing, but rushed to Mount Dibing. Heaven and earth became extremely illusory and stiff in an instant. Only the sword light flew and froze the world. The killing intent was majestic. Wang Xingxiao suddenly stood up. The merged sword energy disappeared instantly. His aura declined. The tide of sword energy returned to its peak state in the blink of an eye. The sword energy covered the stage of formidable person again. The rainbow, like the light from beyond the sky, didn't stop at all. It hit the tide of sword energy without hesitation. Dawn broke in the sky. The entire Mount Dibbing heard a dull thunder-like noise. The sword energy that could tear everything was drawn into the deep sea. Giant waves surged wildly. At that moment Wang Xingxiao looked back at Beihai. The sea and the sky were no longer in his line of sight. Giant waves hundreds of meters high occupied everything in his sight and completely covered the sky. The entire Mount Dibbing was shaking crazily. Only the tide of sword energy continued to gather in the giant waves and wind and snow. Wang Xingxiao slowly turned his head. In front of him, under the dawn sky, a black windbreaker lightly floated in the air, without the slightest hint of smoke or fire. It slowly lifted its cuffs. The majestic sword energy covered the sky and covered the earth, like the scorching sun. This is a misunderstanding. Wang Xingxiao took a deep breath and said slowly. The black shadow raised its palm and looked at Wang Xingxiao. I can guarantee that this won't happen again. You can take the silver moon away at any time. Wang Xingxiao said, it's really a misunderstanding. The black shadow carefully felt the state of the silver moon and then looked at Wang Xingxiao. Wang Xingxiao was motionless. After a long time the sword energy in the sky slowly dissipated. The black shadow slowly turned around, flashed and disappeared instantly. In the horizon. That direction was the direction of Beijiang. Wang Xingxiao narrowed his eyes and watched the black shadow disappear. He was silent for a long time. An invisible sword energy suddenly appeared in the wind and snow. It blended into the tide of sword energy and was extremely harmonious. Wang Xingxiao smiled and said expressionlessly, "Don't worry, my promise is still valid." He looked at the direction where the black shadow left and said lightly, "It will belong to us soon." Chapter 857. The morning sun illuminated the endless desert, the dense camps on the desert, the cabin of the plane and Lin Youxian's eyes. The edge of the defensive line could be vaguely seen in the distance. The plane had already arrived above the capital of Beijiang. Looking down from above, all the troops in the Beijiang military region seemed to have received an extremely tough order. The traffic police, together with some other police officers, began to strictly block the traffic in the cities of Beijiang. A large number of troops gathered and charged towards the direction of the desert. The transport plane flew over half of Beijiang province. In every city Lin Youxian could see mighty troop carriers sprinting in one direction. The unusual movement of Emperor Dong's palace attracted the close attention of the high-level officials of Zhou state. The Beijiang military region also responded in the shortest time possible. The military commander Huang Tong personally gave the order. The special forces of the northern border military region, codenamed Wasteland, immediately headed to the desert and began to set up the fifth line of defense for the desert prison. Following that, two more armies set off one after another. The total number of people in the Beijiang military region was about 120,000. From the beginning of the blockade until now, more than 100,000 people had been mobilized in the Beijiang military region in a day. Now the defense line of the desert prison had increased from 4 to 6, and the total number of people had approached 80,000. The 80,000-strong army was filled with people. Countless supplies, armaments and resources were being consumed at a crazy rate. The council remained silent on all of this. From the beginning to the end, the council had never contacted Emperor Dong's palace. This kind of silence often represented determination. In the face of the rampant arrogance of Emperor Dong's palace, the only choice for Zhou state was to send more troops. If you dare to come, I will dare to fight. It was clear and thorough. The only response from Emperor Dong's palace was no response. The two transport planes carrying most of the combat power of Emperor Dong's palace moved forward and finally approached the capital of Beijiang at dawn. 80,000 people. In the extremely quiet cabin, Lin Youxian's voice sounded softly. He turned around and looked at the elites of Emperor Dong's palace in the cabin. Everyone had woken up from their meditative state. Everyone's face was calm. Lin Youxian takes a deep breath. His voice resounded throughout the cabin. Everyone, there is no turning back now that we're here. There was no turning back. Their actions were blatant. But Zhou state had always ignored this. 80,000 people. 80,000 soldiers of Zhou state. Whether it was their statuses or their numbers, they gave off a suffocating pressure. But there was no turning back. Emperor Dong's palace came here. If they returned to Tianan now, Zhongzhou state might not look into it, but the entire Emperor Dong's palace would become the laughing stock of Zhongzhou state and the dark world. Everything they had now, everything they built, and everything they had imagined would become a complete joke. Less than 2,000 elites faced an army of 80,000 led by an invincible realm expert with a murderous weapon. It will be very difficult for us to win. Lin Yuxian whispered, but we must win. If we lose, we will die. He smiled. Everything is very simple now. 200 kilometers ahead of us is the desert prison. Either we kill our way through or we die in the desert. Some of you have not been in Emperor Dong's palace for a long time, and the time you spent in the Nightmare Core is even shorter. You have imagined the future and faced crises. Now, I don't know how many of you will regret it, but I want to say that this is the decision of Emperor Dong's palace. You can regret it, but you can't quit because none of us, including me, are qualified. So get ready. We expect to be there in half an hour. Then it will be war. Life and death. Take care, everyone. So no one spoke. But everyone picked up their weapons. The cabin was shining with the light of guns and cold weapons. Lin Yuxian looked at all this and he became calmer. A communication with high authority suddenly lit up. The next second, before Lin Yuxian could connect, the gloomy and majestic face of Huang Tong, the commander of the Beijiang military region, had appeared on the screen. In a neat military uniform and a bright red star chest, Huang Tong sat quietly in the huge office. He looked directly at Lin Yuxian through the screen as if he were looking at everyone and said word by word, "Do you know what you are doing?" No one spoke, including other high-level officials in Emperor Dong's palace. Lin Yuxian's voice was calm and he asked, "What about you?" He narrowed his eyes slightly. "Do you know what you are doing?" "Treason." Huang Tong's roar suddenly came through the screen, deafening. "You are all elites of Zhongzhou state. Zhongzhou state trained you not to let you attack the army of Zhongzhou state. In front of you are nearly 100,000 soldiers of Zhongzhou state. What do you want to do? Kill them? What is Zhongzhou state in your eyes? What is the military in your eyes? What are the resources that Zhongzhou state has consumed to train you?" The cabin was still quiet. Everyone bowed their heads and sorted out their weapons without saying a word. Some of them might have regretted it, but as Lin Yuxian said, they were not qualified to quit. Since they joined Emperor Dong's palace, they naturally had to obey the decision of Emperor Dong's palace. What is the military in your eyes? What is an army of 100,000 soldiers in your eyes? Lin Yuxian sneered. If you let them block our way now, you are letting them die. You don't have to deny it. No one can deny it. You are a high-level officer of Zhongzhou state. Do you think the high-level generals of Zhongzhou state will only send their subordinates to die? That's what they should do. Huang Tong gritted his teeth. His mind was a little confused and his words were a little out of proportion. He might have meant to say that soldiers should obey orders, but in the ears of most people, this sentence was obviously saying that sending them to their deaths was what they should do. Huang Tong didn't realize this. Lin Yuxian did not correct him. He just nodded and said, "Everyone has their own things to do and must do, so it doesn't make sense to say anything else." Huang Tong looked at him and was silent for a long time. "Now, on behalf of Emperor Dong's palace, I ask you to make way. General Huang, the kindness of Emperor Dong's palace is never cheap. I hope you can think it over before making a decision. I will give you 5 minutes." Lin Yuxian looked at Huang Tong's eyes and said calmly. Huang Tong laughed. His facial muscles twitched and looked a little ferocious. "Now I can also give you 5 minutes. On behalf of Zhongzhou state, I warn you for the last time that your current behavior is very dangerous. Now I ask you to return immediately and go to where you should go. I hope you can think it over. My army is in front of you. Once you take action, it will be treason." He paused and his cruel smile looked a little meaningful. "I promise that Zhongzhou state will remember the name of every traitor and your family." The atmosphere in the cabin seemed to have changed slightly. Lin Yuxian laughed. His smile suddenly became extremely bright. "You remind me." His voice was soft. The plane flew over the capital of Beijiang and officially entered the desert. The last line of defense at the edge of sight began to become clear. "What?" Huang Tong frowned. He frowned. "Nothing." Lin Yuxian said faintly, I want to remind you that even if Emperor Dong's palace really fails as you expected, it will not fall. At the very least, even if Emperor Dong's palace really disappears, I will not die. He looked at Huang Tong's eyes and said softly, "Remember my name. I am Lin Yuxian, the former heir of the Lin clan." Huang Tong stared at him and his heart kept sinking. "This is not a threat," Lin Yuxian said softly. Lin Yuxian said softly. His gentle eyes were very clear, but with a touch of incomparable ferocity. "No matter what happens this time, I will kill your whole family within a week." Huang Tong's face was livid, but there was a touch of panic that could not be concealed in the depths of his eyes. Lin Yuxian did not wait for his answer. He directly hung up the communication and looked in the direction of the cockpit. His voice could be heard from afar. "Advance 40 kilometers and prepare to land." 40 kilometers ahead. There was no airport. There was only a desert. At this moment, the atmosphere in the entire cabin became extremely crazy. The transport plane went all the way forward. Lin Yuxian stood in place and was silent for a long time. Then he took out his mobile phone and dialed a video call. The video was transmitted for a long time before it was connected. On the screen, a gloomy and indifferent face appeared in front of Lin Yuxian. Lin Yuxian looked at him quietly. To be exact, with his current identity and strength, he was actually not qualified to dial the other party's video call. The other party was willing to answer mostly for the sake of the Lin clan. He had only seen the other party once outside of the news. This was the second time. However, it was different from the amiable expression he had last time. This time, his gaze was teasing, and it carried a wisp of disappointment and coldness that seemed to be there. Lin Yuxian narrowed his eyes and slowly said, "I can solve the problems of Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai. It's not too late to stop now." "How?" In the video, Qin Fengqing's gloomy voice sounded. "Balance." Lin Yuxian's voice was calm and indifferent. "Tianlan didn't promise you, but I can." Li Huaqing and Qin Fengqing wanted Li Tianlan to replace Kunlun City. Li Tianlan did not refuse, but he did not choose to agree either. And Lin Yuxian could agree for himself in Zhuanyuantai. "I'll replace Kunlun City," Lin Yuxian said. This was the new balance. The new Zhuanyuantai stood in Zhongzhou State. The new god of war came out of nowhere. He could watch over Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai and balance each other. Qin Fengqing was silent for a long time. This plan was actually very good. Although Lin Yuxian was immature now, his future was promising. However, this plan really became a reality. What was the point of what he was doing now? He was now sure of victory. What reason did he have to accept this seemingly good balance? Wouldn't it be better if the hidden danger could be solved directly? "You're not qualified to talk to me about this," Qin Fengqing said with a poker face. "You can take this as a notice. I'm not going to talk to you. I'll replace Kunlun City. You can't stop me and Kunlun City can't stop me." The huge body of the transport plane began to descend in the desert. Qin Fengqing's sneer sounded. "Just by yourself? I'll prove it to you." Lin Yuxian finished the last sentence and directly hung up the video. Chapter 858. The screen suddenly went black. The spacious office seemed to have lost all the light and suddenly became extremely dark. The thick curtains were tightly drawn, isolating the light from the outside world. In the office without lights on, Qin Fengqing sat on the sofa. His face was gloomy and even cold. Lin Yuxian said he would prove it to him. How? What did he use to prove? What did he want to prove? Recalling the conversation between the two, Qin Fengqing was silent for a long time. The blue veins on his temples twitched slightly. His headache seemed to be getting worse recently. He stretched out his hand and rubbed his temples with some trembling. After a long time he said expressionlessly, "Zhongzhou State is the most powerful country in the world. Since when does a young man who wants to develop in Zhongzhou State, dare to be so rude to me?" He paused and his hoarse voice became more and more gloomy and deep. "Why is he so rude to me?" Li Huaqing, who was sitting opposite him, glanced at him and said indifferently, "Everyone has something they need to protect. His domineering attitude right now is understandable." Qin Fengqing was not the only one in the office. There were 3 people. Li Huaqing sat opposite Qin Fengqing. The other one was Hua Xingyang, the vice prime minister of Zhongzhou State and one of the academics. At this moment Hua Xingyang glanced at him. His eyes flickered but he did not speak. Something to protect? Qin Fangqing sneered. He is a member of the Lin clan. Is Li Tianlan something he must protect? Or Emperor Dong's palace something he must protect? Qin Weibai. Li Huaqing said flatly, he must protect the patriarch of the Lin clan. Not only him but the entire Lin clan must protect him. The structure of the Lin clan is very different from that of the Wang family of Beihai. Their headquarters will not choose to centralize power. The patriarch has a very high position in the entire Lin clan. The blockade began last night and today is the second day. Lin Yuxian appeared in the desert. Next, in the shortest time, the branches of the Lin clan scattered all over the world will take action and put pressure on Zhou state. Because their patriarch is trapped in the desert, they must show the attitude they should have. He stared at Qin Fangqing and said word by word, the situation is so chaotic. Do you still want to involve the entire Lin clan? The Lin clan was very strong. The whole world knows about it. The Lin clan was very scattered. This was also something that the entire world knew. But just because they were scattered didn't mean they couldn't be united. The relationship between the Lin clan and the major branches had always been subtle. It seemed to be aloof, but in fact they watched each other. The headquarters of the Lin clan was located in Switzerland and stood aloof from worldly affairs. It coordinated the relationship between the major branches and provided military support to the headquarters. For the major branches, it was like a leader who did not intervene in specific affairs, but everyone recognized such a leader. After Qin Weibai became the patriarch of the Lin clan, she did not change the rules in this regard. She had not been the leader of the Lin clan for a long time, but she had already been recognized by most of the branches. This kind of acknowledgement was not just for show. This meant that more than half of the Lin clan had accepted the new patriarch. And when the clan leader was trapped or even sealed, imprisoned in the desert, this sort of acknowledgement had to be displayed with sufficient strength. He had to show enough strength. Because she was the leader of the entire Lin clan. Therefore, as Lin Yuxian took action first, the major branches would unite and exert great pressure on Zhou state in different fields. No one was willing to let a behemoth like the Lin clan participate in today's chaos, because no one knew what kind of result their entry would have on the situation. Li Huaqing was unwilling and neither was Qin Fangqing. But no matter how unwilling he was, he couldn't express his position. There was only one way to make the Lin clan withdraw. Take Qin Weibai out safely. But Qin Fangqing would not do that unless he was crazy. Qin Weibai was the patriarch of the Lin clan. She was Qin Weibai's woman, and she used to be the planner of all the plans of the Samsara palace. If such a woman was let out, the consequences would be even more serious than letting Li Tianlan out directly. She might set up a trap casually and countless people might be killed. When individual force did not reach the point where it could reverse the general trend, wisdom was often more important than force. So this option did not exist in Qin Fangqing's mind at all. The only thing he could do was to brace himself to resist the pressure of the Lin clan and solve the countless troubles in front of him as soon as possible. I have no choice. Qin Fangqing gritted his teeth. Li Huaqing looked at Qin Fangqing's face and sighed with emotion. He had known him for many years. There was no way around it. He had been saying these words more often than he had in the past few years. That young man's suggestion might be a way to solve the problem. Li Huaqing suddenly said. Are you tempted? Qin Fangqing was shocked. Raising his head, he looked at Li Huaqing with hostility in his eyes. Since there's nothing we can do, we can only compromise. It's not good for anyone to make a big scene. At least he's right about one thing. It's not too late to turn back now. Li Huaqing said calmly. At the very least, he hadn't caused too serious or irreconcilable enmity yet. If he stopped now, there were many things that could be discussed. It's too late. Qin Fangqing grinned and laughed somewhat crazily. It's too late. I have nowhere to retreat. If I stop now, what's the point of everything I've done? If he stopped now, then what about those who had been sacrificed in the North Sea? It may be a new balance to let Lin Yuxian replace Kunlun City, but who can be sure that this is not inviting a wolf into the house? With red eyes, he looked at Li Huaqing. The most important thing is that although the situation is chaotic, I haven't lost yet. The Beijiang military region has mobilized more than 100,000 troops. Gu Qianchuan has a murderous weapon. How can I lose? So? Li Huaqing asked. This is a war. Qin Fangqing lowered his eyelids. Li Huaqing nodded and said lightly, remember, this is your war, not mine or Zhou state's. Qin Fangqing did not speak. This was the inevitable result. When he took over the leadership of this matter, there would be such a result. If he won, it would be his credit. If he lost, it would be his sin. Li Huaqing stood up and walked out of the office. Hua Xingyang also stood up and followed him out. When he was about to reach the door, Li Huaqing's figure suddenly paused and asked, "Can we meet again?" Qin Fangqing lowered his head and listened to Li Huaqing's clear statement. He laughed, somewhat self-deprecating and a little crazy. "Of course," he said lightly, "I can't fail." Li Huaqing nodded and closed the office door. It seemed that from this moment on, Li Huaqing and Qin Fangqing, the two giants who had brought great pressure to North Sea and the giant group, officially parted ways. Li Huaqing's eyes were calm. This was a war, but no matter what the result was, it would have nothing to do with him. This was not his weakness. He just felt that when the situation was really chaotic and was about to get out of control, there must always be a person who kept sober to clean up the final mess. Qin Fangqing did not have such sobriety, nor did Wang Xingxiao. He shook his head and sighed. Chapter 859. The large transport plane was getting closer and closer, flying lower and lower. It was busy everywhere in the desert. The plane landed savagely. The base was being built crazily. In the entire northern borderline military region, the Yellow Sand Corps could not be considered a top-notch army. The Yellow Sand Corps was organized as a division, and it had a passable size of over 9,000 people. The senior colonel with the code name Sand Tiger had passable capabilities, and the quality of the soldiers in the corps was passable. All these factors added together allowed the Yellow Sand Corps to maintain its position in the northern borderline military region. When the entire Beijiang military region began to be mobilized, the Huangsha Corps naturally received the order. But they were not the top troop after all. And they set off late and in a hurry. When they arrived at the destination, the transport plane of Emperor Dong's palace had already appeared in front of them before they could finish the basic fortifications. The roar of the transport plane was loud and dull, sounding extremely domineering. In the eyes of all the people in the Huangsha Corps, two huge objects swooped down like goshawks from the sky, without any reservation or hesitation. Looking at the scene in the sky, countless people turned pale. Every soldier knew who they were stopping. The heavenly sons locked in prison. Those influential figures in the southern heaven region were like clouds and rain with a flip of their hands. The Emperor Dong's palace that was gradually rising to the peak of Zhongzhou state. All of these were not what these ordinary soldiers could afford to provoke, nor were they willing to face. But military orders were absolute. They had already arrived here and they had just found their footing when they encountered the enemy they didn't want to encounter the most. This was a war. This was a war. How many people in the Huangsha Corps would die? This time people were really going to die. They were going to die because of the so-called general trend that an ordinary soldier could not understand. No one resented Emperor Dong's palace. Because this was an enemy they couldn't resist. They only had nervousness and fear in their hearts. But at this moment, everyone resented Huang Tong. This commander used the most ordinary troops to stop the most powerful armed forces of Emperor Dong's palace. It was obvious that he was sending them to their deaths. The plane was getting closer and closer. The huge outline was shining in the sunlight, making it hard for people to look at it directly. The chaos in the Huangsha Corps was gradually expanding. Report. Emperor Dong's palace. In the stammering voice, a soldier quickly ran to Sha Hu, the commander of the Huangsha Corps, with a pale and anxious face. In the middle of the camp, Sand Tiger looked up at the sky in silence. There was no need for any report at all. The direction in which the two transport planes were landing was clear and definite. As long as one was not blind, they would be able to see their destination. Sand Tiger was silent for a moment. His gloomy face was tinged with fear and anger as he whispered, F***CK. It was as if he had won the lottery. Everyone knew that it was impossible for the transport planes of Emperor Dong's palace to have a special landing place. The military region of Beijiang would not allow them to land at the military airport. Naturally, the civil aviation did not dare to make it convenient for Emperor Dong's palace. Therefore, their landing place could only be random. If ordinary people did this, they would be courting death, but it was not difficult for the masters of Emperor Dong's palace to do this. However, Sand Tiger did not expect the other party to land right in front of his camp. 20 kilometers to the south was the encampment of another legion. The two legions formed the sixth line of defense. Originally, they were not under much pressure because many people thought that Emperor Dong's palace would directly fly over the back lines of defense and rush to the desert prison, or at least to the core of the 43rd Division. But now, Emperor Dong's palace began to descend from the outermost area and landed in front of them. Their combat capability was not worth mentioning in front of the Nightmare Troop, which was now famous in the Dark World. Commander, it is said that some anti-air weapons in the front lines have been set up, so... A deputy walked over and said with a solemn expression. The military region of Beijiang naturally had anti-air weapons. They were similar to anti-aircraft guns, and they even had exclusive fighter jets and armed helicopters. No one would doubt the determination of Zhongzhou's state. That was why Emperor Dong's palace decided to land here? But most of the weapons facilities here were not ready. It was impossible for the rear to not know this, but so far he had not received any support, not even the latest order. What was this? Did they really send them here to die? *CK them. Sand Tiger gritted his teeth and could not help but curse. Anyone who was used as cannon fodder would feel bad. Commander. The roaring transport planes were flying lower and lower. Sand Tiger's eyes were red, but the troops were already here and it was too late to retreat. He suddenly turned his head and said angrily, Commander? What commander? The enemy is already at the door. Should I teach you how to fight a war step by step? Open fire, use whatever you have. Blast those bastards to pieces for me. The deputy froze for a moment. Sand Tiger's voice had been suppressed to the extreme. I said fire. This is war. The deputy took a deep breath and his face was obviously timid. His face was clearly timid and his hands were trembling as he saluted. He slowly turned around, looked at the approaching transport plane and suddenly said, aim at the enemy, fire. There was no leeway, no discussion, no concession. Emperor Dong's palace had already made its attitude clear. It was useless to say more. What was Zhongzhou state afraid of? The transport planes cast a huge shadow on the desert. In the yellow sand core, the first gunfire suddenly roared. Then a large number of cannonballs shot straight into the sky like fireballs under the scorching sun. Sand Tiger stared at the two transport planes in the air. The sun and the cannonballs crisscrossed in the air. At that moment, the whole sky seemed to be blurred for a moment. In Sand Tiger's perception, countless sword energy suddenly broke out in the transport planes. Obviously, the sword energy did not belong to the same person intertwined and formed a pseudo-domain similar to the invincible realm in an instant. The pseudo-domain directly wrapped the two transport planes. The falling speed of the transport planes suddenly slowed down for a moment, and then became slower and slower. The cannonballs all over the sky bombarded the pseudo-domain. The space was turbulent and distorted in a shape visible to the naked eye, and the surging explosion drowned everything. The speed of the transport planes was getting slower and slower and finally almost stopped. Everyone could only watch as the two unimaginably heavy transport planes descended bit by bit in a strange manner. They could only launch endless artillery fire in vain. In Sand Tiger's sight, the space of the pseudo-domain slightly fluctuated for a moment. Then one figure after another appeared in the pseudo-domain. Everyone was surrounded by electric arcs, exuding a surging aura. Sand Tiger's eyes swept over them one by one. Every one of them was a thunder-shocking realm expert. They belonged to the thunder-shocking realm experts of Emperor Dong's palace. Although there were not many of them, their young faces were enough to make people feel awe from the bottom of their hearts. The leader of the group of thunder-shocking realm experts was Zhou Xian. He was the commander of the Nightmare Army, which almost everyone in Tiannan knew. The two commanders looked at each other across the air for a moment. Sand Tiger saw the corner of Zhou Xian's mouth move and he seemed to smile. The pseudo-domain, which was a little fuzzy and seemed to be barely able to maintain the two transport planes, suddenly expanded, spread and then began to distort. The transport planes, which were almost deformed, fell down and moved forward. One by one, the elites of the Nightmare Army jumped down from the open cabin door. The cannonballs all over the sky were deafening. Zhou Xian suddenly raised his palm. With his movement, everyone raised their palms at the same time. Sand Tiger's face changed dramatically and he suddenly roared, "Everyone retreat." Chapter 860. No one retreated. Not because of the bravery of the Yellow Sand Corps, but because it was too late or they couldn't react. When Sand Tiger shouted this sentence, it was too late. The dense artillery fire was still whistling in the air. All the high-level officials of the thunder-shocking realm in Emperor Dong's palace had taken action at the same time. The pseudo-domain mixed with countless forces and sword intent was like a bomb. Several thunder-shocking realm experts pushed the pseudo-domain at the same time, and the pseudo-domain drove the trembling transport plane. It was like two dark clouds that suddenly arrived. The light in the desert suddenly dimmed. The huge body of the transport plane blocked the sunlight. Countless soldiers of the Yellow Sand Corps raised their heads. The space above their sight was distorted, but the huge body of the transport plane was extremely clear, getting closer and closer. There was still artillery fire in the Yellow Sand Corps. Everything happened so fast that no one had time to make any changes. What changed was the pseudo-domain. The distorted pseudo-domain was completely shattered under the artillery fire, and the transport plane loaded with a lot of ammunition was exposed to the artillery fire. Falling, trembling, deforming. Zhou Xian Tiger's hoarse, desperate roar suddenly rang out. Explosion. In the quiet desert, there was the first loud noise since the start of the blockade operation. It was earth-shattering. The shockwave produced by the explosion brought up a large amount of yellow sand, which blended with the intense flames. Billowing black smoke rose up crazily, covering everything. The wreckage of the transport planes kept on exploding and raging flames surged. Flesh, and blood spewed out amidst the raging flames. There were no agonizing cries or wails amidst the loud explosions. The intense explosions occupied everything, and the base that the Yellow Sand Army had yet to finish building in time instantly turned into a true Azura hell. Blood, death, wild sand, fire and black smoke. Under the sunlight, Emperor Dong's palace, which had cut off their retreat at the first time, directly turned everything into an irreversible situation. The nightmare troop gathered quickly. At this point no one had any more hesitation. They didn't even have any regrets. Because everything was meaningless. The yellow sand of the desert was like an army of mountains and seas. Rush over. They could only rush over. The fire was still burning. The sound of explosion had gradually disappeared. The base of the Yellow Sand Corps had almost become a ruin. A large number of mutilated corpses were exposed to the sunlight. Many surviving soldiers climbed up in a daze, completely forgetting what they should do. In the huge explosion they were lucky not to die. At this moment they couldn't hear any sound from the outside world. Messy, broken and battered. Lin Yuxian squinted at this scene, and his eyes were calm without any emotion. The Nightmare Legion had completely assembled behind him. Neat, austere, resolute. His gaze went past the Yellow Sand Army in front of him and looked at the next line of defense. The fifth line of defense was the only special force in the Beijiang military region. Codename Wasteland. The corner of Lin Yuxian's mouth moved. Before he could speak, a roar suddenly sounded. In the shining thunder, Sand Tiger, the commander of the Yellow Sand Corps with a ferocious and resentful face, almost rushed over desperately and tried his best to punch Lin Yuxian. Lin Yuxian raised his hand casually and grabbed Sand Tiger's fist. Under the tremendous force his body did not move at all. Lin Yuxian's arm shook slightly. In the clear cracking sound, Sand Tiger's entire arm was completely shattered. Sand Tiger let out a muffled groan and clenched his teeth. Under the intense pain, his face became even more twisted. You started this war. He stared at Lin Yuxian and his complicated tone seemed to contain countless negative emotions. You opened fire first. Lin Yuxian's voice was soft and flat. If you hadn't come, all this would not have happened at all. Sand Tiger roared like a madman. He was a thunder-shocking realm expert, but he just barely entered the thunder-shocking realm. At the first moment of the explosion he had no time to retreat. The only choice was to try to protect more people around him. The huge impact made him seriously injured. He could not bear to look at the tragedy in the base. The explosion lasted only for a moment, but thousands of people died in the explosion. There were countless seriously injured people. Although there were many survivors, they did not have to count on any combat capability. The cruel means of Emperor Dong's palace directly dispelled all their courage to resist. From now on this army almost existed in name only. The plane landed, the explosion and the base became ruins. The whole process did not take more than 2 minutes. And the war had officially begun. Sand Tiger trembled all over, not knowing whether it was because of pain or despair. If there were no blockade actions we would not have come here at all. Lin Yuxian seemed to lose all interest all of a sudden. He shook his head and said calmly, "It's meaningless to say this. You should know that who is right and who is wrong can't be distinguished by arguing. I will go there today. Your army is just the beginning. Today many people will die, many people. Maybe I will die on the way. In that case I will be a sinner, a traitor in your words. Emperor Dong's palace will be responsible for all the responsibilities and consequences today. But I will rush over. When I rush to the desert prison, Qin Fangqing will be responsible for all the responsibilities and consequences." He lowered his head, looked into Sand Tiger's eyes and said calmly, "You are indeed innocent, but at least there is no winner or loser. You can't blame me." Sand Tiger's face was pale and he was silent for a long time. "Can you understand?" Lin Yuxian asked. Sand Tiger slowly raised his head and stared into Lin Yuxian's eyes. "You won't succeed and you can't succeed. But you won't see me fail." Lin Yuxian gently flicked his fingers. A sword energy flew out of his fingertips and pierced Sand Tiger's forehead in an instant. Countless soldiers of the Yellow Sand Corps saw this scene. Their willpower completely collapsed. No one knew who first shouted that the division commander was dead. The surviving soldiers fell into complete chaos and began to flee in different directions. Lin Yuxian watched this scene quietly and did not chase them. What he had done was enough. It was quiet behind him. The overall aura of the Nightmare Corps became calmer. Lin Yuxian turned around, looked at the corps of less than 2,000 people behind him and asked again, "Can you understand?" No one spoke, but everyone's eyes were more determined. "I can make it simpler." Lin Yuxian smiled. His smile was indescribably cruel in the yellow sand and ruins. "If we survive today's battle, we will be the heroes of Zhongzhou State. If we die here, we will be the sinners of Zhongzhou State. You can't choose to quit, but you can choose the results you create. Do you understand?" After a short silence, a deafening roar broke through the sky. "Understood." Lin Yuxian said no more and turned around directly. Scope. The Nightmare Corps marched at full speed and rushed through the ruins of the Yellow Sand Corps. Before anyone could react, they rushed directly to the fifth line of defense guarded by the Special Brigade in the wilderness. This day was December 4th of Zhongzhou State. When the transport plane of Emperor Dong's palace landed, it was 7 o'clock in the morning on December 4th. At 7:02, the sixth line of defense was directly torn apart by the Nightmare Corps. The Nightmare Corps went all out. Less than 2,000 elites charged at full speed. At 8:55, the fifth line of defense was close at hand. The only special brigade in Beijing was ready in the wilderness. 6,000 elites fully armed. At 9:40, the line of defense formed by the special brigade in the wilderness was completely shattered. Li Beitian killed Kong Shao, the captain of the special brigade in the wilderness. 4 platoon captains died in battle, and more than half of the middle-level officers were lost. The Yellow Sand Corps did not stop and went all the way forward. It was like a sharp sword. At 11 o'clock, the fourth line of defense was completely torn apart by the sharp sword. Bai Yuming killed Yang Zhan, the commander of the field corps in Beijing. From 7 o'clock to 11 o'clock. In 4 hours the Nightmare Corps destroyed nearly 40,000 troops. They were invincible. Chapter 861. Ever since the name of the Nightmare Legion was submitted to the military and was approved, the Nightmare Legion had received a lot of attention. At that time, Li Tianlan was still the commander of the Snowdance Corps, leading the most elite corps of Zhongzhou State to shed blood for Zhongzhou State in Eastern Europe. The wind and clouds were turbulent, the general trend was changing, and the invincible realm experts kept dying. All the light seemed to gather on Li Tianlan. During that period Li Tianlan was like the rising sun. No matter how one tried to ignore it, he was there, dazzling and brilliant. In contrast, the establishment of Emperor Dong's palace was extremely low-key. Even so, the establishment of the Nightmare Legion made many people restless. The first written report submitted by the Nightmare Legion to the military had fully explained the uniqueness of the Nightmare Legion. It was a top-notch troop with top-notch average strength, rich experience, proficient in fighting under all kinds of conditions and competent in any war mission. To be precise, they were the top war weapons of Emperor Dong's palace. No one would doubt that. At that time Lin Yuxian was not famous. But with Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao in front of him, no one dared to underestimate Lin Yuxian's strength. On the contrary, because he rarely fought, everyone felt that he was extremely mysterious. Such a mysterious successor of the Lin clan became the commander of the Nightmare Legion. A new army made up of graduates from the two academies. From the very beginning, the establishment of the Nightmare Legion had established its position. Regardless of whether it was the choice of the army commander, the main composition of the army, or the average strength, it all proved that this was a top-notch combat force even in the entire world. Initially, the Nightmare Legion had a total of 1,300 people. Their average strength was at the stabilization phase of the ice-freezing realm. 2 years later, the Nightmare Army had expanded to 1,600 people with an average strength of the peak of the ice-condensing realm after continuous optimization and adjustment of its structure. It was estimated that the average strength of the Nightmare Army would reach the fire-flaming realm in 3 years. This is not a solo game. It was the army. Looking at the troops of every country and every superpower in the world, there was only one real organized army whose average strength was at the peak of the ice-condensing realm. Moreover, this unit only existed 5 years ago. The so-called real army referred to the size of the army, the equipment, the supply system, the command lineup, the combat authority, and a series of other conditions, all reaching the standard of a regular army. That was the former Border Imperial Army, the Thunderbolt Battalion. Invincible and invincible. Currently, the Nightmare Legion, which had less than 2,000 people, was still far from the standard of a regular legion. However, in terms of combat power, the same number of people was almost on par with the Thunderbolt Legion. The graduates of the two academies all had good credits, and credits often represented a lot of experience during their studies. Therefore, every graduate could be considered a mature soldier. The Nightmare Legion was naturally a mature legion. Their commander might still be very young and not as experienced as Dongqing Wudi, but Lin Youxian's current strength had surpassed Dongqing Wudi's. In terms of sharpness and actual combat capability, the Nightmare Corps led by Lin Youxian would only be stronger and more unstoppable than the Thunderbolt Battalion. In the past 2 years there had been constant frictions in the Southern Heaven region, but there had been almost no major conflicts. No one had expected that the first large-scale battle after the establishment of the Nightmare Legion would take place between the Nightmare Legion and the Northern Borderline Military Region. In 4 hours, Destruction Army had nearly 40,000. The entire Nightmare Legion was like a thunderstorm that swept through the desert in an instant, without any hesitation or pause. Halt, attack, charge, march, attack. The simplest way, the most violent battle. When people reacted, the Nightmare Legion had broken through 2 lines of defense. The Yellow Sand Corps and the wilderness had been completely torn apart and scattered. Countless people were watching this scene. Countless people called the Hidden Dragon Sea. Li Huaqing's office became extremely busy. The general office of Zhongzhou State also became extremely busy. The phones of several secretaries who were close to Li Huaqing almost never stopped ringing. Just from the simple ringing of the phone, Li Huaqing had clearly felt the anxiety and even anger behind the phone calls. It can't go on like this. In the huge office, Hua Xingyang, who had been communicating with Li Huaqing, suddenly stood up. Should we talk to him again? Do you think he has nothing to do now? Li Huaqing shook his head. It's already like this here. It will only be more chaotic on his side. In any case, it's still necessary to try again. Hua Xingyang refused to give up. No need. Li Huaqing lowered his head and held the teacup. After a long time he said faintly, he won't listen. He has gone crazy. What is this? Our goal was originally the Wang family of Beihai, but now we launched a war against Emperor Dong's palace first. Who does he think he is? Does he really think that Dongqing Wudi has no temper? They blocked the desert prison. I don't agree with them, but I can't disagree. The termination plan has been exposed. This news must be blocked for the desert prison. But it's just a block. What's happening now is a war between Emperor Dong's palace and Zhongzhou State. Civil war? What does he want to do? Hua Xingyang's tone was intense. It was as if he was venting his emotions. Li Huaqing didn't speak. He didn't need to answer anything. Because Hua Xingyang also knew. Things had come to this point and there was no way to stop. Some things were wrong from the beginning. In other words, once it was exposed, it was wrong. They knew everything that happened today, but it was already irreversible. Therefore, Li Huaqing had withdrawn as soon as the termination plan was exposed and handed over the leadership of this matter to Chen Fangqing. It was not that he cherished his reputation. He didn't care what would happen to him after he suppressed the Wang family of Beihai, and he didn't care about some short-term damage to Zhongzhou State. because if he could defeat the Wang family of Beihai, it was indeed beneficial to the development of Zhongzhou state. There were only 4 words to describe his reason for retreating. It was impossible. The blockade of the desert prison would inevitably lead to a war. Before the decisive battle in Beihai, the war with Emperor Dong's palace was also inevitable. Li Huaqing really didn't dare to bet all his bets on Qin Fangqing. Like 2 completely red-eyed gamblers, they gambled on the outcome of a war with the future of Zhongzhou state. In that case, no matter what the result was, Zhongzhou state was bound to lose. They were leaders, not gamblers. When Qin Fangqing turned from a leader to a gambler, Li Huaqing could only force himself to stay awake and think about the next outcome. As for now, all he could do was wait and see. No matter what the outcome of this war was, he couldn't change it. All he could do was to try to control the situation after the war. Even after the final battle, he would try his best to control the situation. Hua Xingyang glanced at Li Huaqing. After a long silence, he said seriously, "We have to do something. It's difficult." Li Huaqing simply replied and calmly said, "This is no longer a game. From the perspective of a soldier, this was a war. But from the perspective of the overall situation, this was life and death. Things were doomed the moment the termination plan was exposed. It was the life and death of Qin Fangqing, Li Tianlan, and the Wang family of Beihai. The war in the desert would not be the end, but a beginning. 100,000 troops, thundershocking realm experts, invincible realm experts, murderous weapons, everything. He didn't need to look to know that countless people would bleed in this war, and even blood would flow like a river. These people couldn't die in vain. Someone had to pay the price for this, a heavy price. The heaviest price was nothing more than death. Qin Fangqing took over the leadership. He, Emperor Dong's palace, and Beihai had long been in a desperate situation. This was indeed no longer a game. Qin Fangqing had even forgotten or deliberately ignored the original goal. Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai were all in his sight. What he wanted to do was to completely destroy Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai. If Emperor Dong's palace and Mount Dibing still existed this time, and Li Tianlan and Wang Xingxiao didn't die, Qin Fangqing would die. And it would be soon. This was not a problem that could be solved by giving up the position at all. Li Huaqing took a deep breath. Zhongzhou state had secretly discussed the candidates for the next directors and members of parliament as early as a few years ago. Now there was basically a conclusion. Li Huaqing confirmed that he would be re-elected next year. He had been the president for 10 years and he was generally highly regarded in Zhongzhou state. Even the academics and the Southeast group voted in favor of him. Because Li Huaqing handled things calmly, used gentle means and rarely used violent means. When he could achieve the desired effect, he would not hurt many people. Li Huaqing's grasp of propriety could be said to be at the peak. In the current chaotic situation, letting Li Huaqing be re-elected was the safest way. But Li Huaqing was not happy at all. Qin Fangqing single-handedly turned the situation into this. In this war, no matter who won or lost, he would face a more complicated situation than now or even before the game after being re-elected. Li Huaqing bowed his head and took a sip of tea, feeling more and more tired. Lin Yuxian can't die, he said softly. Hua Xingyang was stunned. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Do you think Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai are good?" "No." Li Huaqing said slowly, "No matter who wins or loses, Lin Yuxian can't die. He is the most useful. If Emperor Dong's palace won, he would not hesitate to let Lin Yuxian replace Kunlun City and become the core force to restrain Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai to reach a new balance. If Qin Fangqing won, the power of Qin Fangqing and the Prince Group would expand to an unimaginable level." Li Huaqing also needed Lin Yuxian to take the position to ensure his right to speak in the future. Hua Xingyang thought about it. Finally, he nodded and said, "I'll do it." The Beijiang military region was the territory of the Prince Group, so it was difficult for them to intervene. But Gu Qianchuan was still there. No matter how much he cooperated with the Prince Group, he did not dare to openly ignore the order of the president. Li Huaqing drank tea and did not speak. Hua Xingyang was shocked to find that the core of the current war was still Emperor Dong's palace, the Wang family of Beihai and Qin Fangqing. But the most important person had become Lin Yuxian. Chapter 862. A badly mutilated figure was hung on the broken cylinder. The sandstorm attacked. The yellow sand covered his figure and covered his flesh. His body looked like an ornament hanging on a flagpole. The torture had just passed. Many reopened wounds had not had time to heal. The sandstorm kept blowing. The blood beads flowed, soaked in the sandstorm, and fell to the ground. Then they were blocked by the sandstorm in the distance. The pain kept repeating. He lowered his head and closed his eyes. He seemed to be asleep or dead. Hua! The sound of water breaking through the air rang in his ears. The next moment, a large amount of water mixed with a lot of salt was poured directly on him. The salt mixed with the yellow sand seeped into the deep wound. The piercing pain made his body shiver. He gritted his teeth, opened his eyes, and did not say a word. In front of him was a gun with a strange shape but boundlessly domineering. It was like the most primitive double-barreled shotgun, but the barrel continued to extend in his sight and eventually became an exaggeratedly large heavy sniper rifle. The sniper rifle lifted his chin at the entrance of the alley. Gu Qianchuan stood under the flagpole and patted his face with the barrel. His movements were elegant and unhurried. But when the muzzle fell on his face, his entire face was deformed under the great force and several teeth were knocked out. "Lieutenant General, do you know why you are still alive?" Gu Qianchuan said with a faint smile. The huge heavy sniper rifle in his hand constantly changed color, from golden yellow to light yellow and then to orange-red. Under the sun it seemed to be the color of the setting sun. What he held in his hand was the murderous weapon Setting Sun, which had been passed down for hundreds of years in Zhongzhou state. "Because you dare not kill me." The salt water penetrated into his body along the wound. His body trembled slightly in pain. He could even feel the yellow sand being rushed into the wound by the water and rubbing against his flesh. "I'm Gu Qianchuan, the director of Emperor Dong's palace. You better know what you're doing. You must pay for what you've done today." His expression became a little ferocious because of the pain, but the contempt and ghastliness in his tone were vividly displayed. Bang! The barrel of Setting Sun hit Xiao Mohai's head hard. Blood splattered. Gu Qianchuan raised his palm and opened his domain. The air in the domain was compressed rapidly and turned into countless blades. The blades shrouded Xiao Mohai's body like a storm, cutting his flesh. Sunset's huge muzzle continued to fall on Xiao Mohai's body. "That's not the answer I want. I don't dare. You're just a little thunder-shocking realm expert. I don't dare to kill you." What did he think he was? What was this? What was this? What the F***CK? What was this? Tell me, what is it? Blood splashed on Gu Qianchuan. Ouyang Pengfei, the commander of the 43rd Army who had been following Gu Qianchuan, hurried over and pulled Gu Qianchuan. He whispered, "Your Highness, don't get excited. It's not worth it." Xiao Mohai's head drooped. He had already fallen into a coma. "Wake him up. I'll play with him slowly." The chief steward of Emperor Dong's palace? What a big shot. You scared me to death. Gu Qianchuan sneered. "Your Highness." Gu Qianchuan wanted to say something but stopped. "What?" Gu Qianchuan narrowed his eyes and looked at Ouyang Pengfei. "Is it not fun?" Bang! The sunset in his hand once again fell on Xiao Mohai's shoulder and directly broke one of his arms. "Funha, it's really fun." Gu Qianchuan laughed somewhat crazily. His eyes were red, looking like a beast with bloodshot eyes. He would never forget the scene when he caught Xiao Mohai. Xiao Mohai, who carefully avoided the light of the explorer, unknowingly walked into his domain. Gu Qianchuan instantly took action and broke the opponent's invisibility. He stepped on the opponent's head like a dead dog. He was as majestic as a god who controlled life and death. The nearby elites of the 43rd Army all rushed over and surrounded Xiao Mohai. Xiao Mohai kept struggling and was finally kicked away by Gu Qianchuan. His body fell in front of the soldiers of the 43rd Army. He was covered in blood and looked like a wild dog. The wild dog struggled to stand up. His face was bleeding, but he still had a kind of calmness that made Gu Qianchuan feel very strange. Surrounded by countless elites of the 43rd Army, the little warden, who was only at the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, looked directly at Gu Qianchuan and said something that Gu Qianchuan did not expect. "Do you know what you are doing?" It was a question. He actually asked if he knew what he was doing. Gu Qianchuan felt it was incredible. At that time his mind was still balanced and he did not bother to say more to Xiao Mohai. He just said, "Take him down." This order was naturally issued to the 43rd Army. The elites of the 43rd Army just moved. Xiao Mohai had spoken again. His tone was still that damned calm but with a touch of coldness and ghastly. I am the supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace. I stand here and represent the entire Emperor Dong's palace. Who dares to stop me? Then the scene froze. Yes, it was so incredible that it froze. After countless elites of the 43rd Army looked at each other, no one moved. Until that moment, Gu Qianchuan's heart really sank to the bottom. It was also from that moment that he completely understood the position of Kunlun City in Zhongzhou State. He was the first elder of the invincible realm of Kunlun City and the current acting governor of Kunlun City. He had stabilized the invincible realm, held a murderous weapon, and was also the supreme commander of this blockade operation. He had a high position and was powerful. Gu Qianchuan could be sure that when he held a murderous weapon he was almost the strongest person in Zhongzhou State today. Now he ordered his subordinates to catch a supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace. No one dared to move. Because he was the supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace. This identity could make them dare to disobey the order of the acting governor of Kunlun City, their commander-in-chief. What did this mean? At that moment, Gu Qianchuan was so angry that he saw stars and trembled. His anger was mixed with fear. It turned out that Kunlun City had fallen to such a dangerous position in the hearts of the soldiers of Zhongzhou State unconsciously. Why did this happen? To some extent, the attitude shown by the soldiers showed that they could not afford to offend the supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace than the acting governor of Kunlun City. For more than 20 years, Kunlun City had been the special warfare center of Zhongzhou State, and Gu Xingyun had always been the top 5 experts on the divine list. Kunlun City developed steadily and established a special warfare group, which was absolutely a behemoth in Zhongzhou State. They could not compare with the Wang family of Beihai, but they could bear it. After all, the foundation and glory of the other party were there. After overthrowing the Li family, they had always felt that they were the second most powerful wealthy family in Zhongzhou State. But now there was another stunning young man in the Li family that they had overturned with their own hands. He had only risen for a few years, but he had once again surpassed the status of Kunlun City. Why? Gu Qianchuan stood there and could not say anything for a while. In his sight, Xiao Mohai was moving. He carefully wiped the blood on his face, supported his seriously injured body and strode forward. Gu Qianchuan did not retreat. But the entire encirclement was retreating as Xiao Mohai moved forward. It was because of that sentence. I am the supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace. This sentence made him stare at the pressure of tens of thousands of elites of the 43rd Army and directly walk forward for nearly 2 kilometers, almost out of the edge of the 43rd Army. No one dared to take action. Gu Qianchuan could not bear it anymore. He personally took down Xiao Mohai, hung him on the flagpole and served him with all kinds of torture for a day. Xiao Mohai suffered pain but his heart was still calm. Gu Qianchuan stopped smiling. Looking at Xiao Mohai hanging on the flagpole, he thought, until now this damn dog of Emperor Dong's palace still thinks I dare not kill him. Gu Qianchuan endured and resisted the desire to kill him now. Looking at Xiao Mohai, who was slowly waking up from a coma, he said in a soft voice, Lieutenant General, don't challenge my patience. I don't kill him because he is valuable. Tell me everything you know about him in the desert prison in the past 2 years. The more detailed, the better. Huh? Xiao Mohai took a deep breath weakly and sneered. I'm afraid you haven't woken up yet. Gu Qianchuan, if you have the guts, kill me directly. When His Highness comes out, I'll see how to live. Slap. Gu Qianchuan slapped Xiao Mohai's face hard and said expressionlessly, Do you really think I dare not kill you? Come and kill me. Xiao Mohai stared into Gu Qianchuan's eyes. His eyes were filled with madness and aggression. How you kill me today, His Highness will kill me in the future. Not only that, but the entire Kunlun City will be buried with me. It's worth it. You don't know what's good for you. Gu Qianchuan took a step back and said faintly, Undead. A skinny man came out and sneered. He looked at Xiao Mohai as if he were a prey in his hands. Don't let him die so easily. I want to let him taste real pain and despair. Gu Qianchuan paused and continued, And what I want. As you wish, Your Highness. The undead grinned in a low voice. He slowly reached out. 2 extremely thin blades fell into his hands. His eyes were smiling so widely that they were almost invisible. All that was left on his face was excitement and ridicule. Come on, Lieutenant General. You are the guest with the highest rank I have ever received. Let's play a fun game, shall we? The blade in his hand stabbed into Xiao Mohai's abdomen. Xiao Mohai's body suddenly stiffened for a moment. The next second, Xiao Mohai, who could hold back even if salt was sprinkled on the wound, suddenly screamed hoarsely. The screams were accompanied by the undead's increasingly excited laughter, which made everyone's scalp numb. Ouyang Pengfei looked at this scene, and his eyes were gradually filled with fear. I still don't understand the situation now. Gu Qianchuan looked at Xiao Mohai with some disdain. It's Zhongzhou State, not me, who really wants to move against Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan. Kunlun City is just cooperating with the action. The Prime Minister has taken over all the dominance of this game. Lieutenant General, the wind has changed. Now it's a war and Zhongzhou State will not leave any leeway. Even if Li Tianlan is invincible, so what? Even if Li Tianlan is invincible, Emperor Dong's palace and the Wang family of Beihai will not be able to defeat Zhongzhou State. Or, do you think that the current Emperor Dong's palace can overthrow the Prime Minister and the Prince group? Go, In the screams that seemed to hurt into the bone, Gu Qianchuan praised expressionlessly, "You are really a loyal dog with hard bones. The supervisor of Emperor Dong's palace. Oh, is that great?" He bowed his head and gently stroked the human emperor in his hand. He calmly said, "The elites of Emperor Dong's palace have entered the desert and will not die for the time being. I will let you see your so-called highness suffer a crushing defeat, your so-called goddess fall and your so-called Emperor Dong's palace fall." The blood-curdling screams came to a stop, leaving behind only hoarse and weak breathing. The undead smiled strangely and took out a new set of toys. Gu Qianchuan held the sniper rifle and lifted Xiao Mohai's head. "Say it or not?" "Oh." The only reply he got was a sneer. "Do you really think I care about this information?" A ferocious look flashed in Gu Qianchuan's eyes. "There's no chance, Lieutenant General. Just wait to die here with my colleagues whom I haven't met. Wei Kunlun and Situ Songyue will not come here, so no matter how bad things are, I will only face Li Tianlan at most." He held the sniper rifle in his hand and said in a calm and gloomy tone, "If it's one-on-one, I have the setting sun in my hand. Who in Zhongzhou State can beat me?" Chapter 863. The screams continued to reverberate. Gu Qianchuan stood motionless under the flagpole, watching the undead use different torture instruments in different ways. He enjoyed it very much. The undead played the game tirelessly and enjoyed it even more. The unimaginable pain kept tormenting Xiao Mohai's will. The surrounding soldiers, including Ouyang Pengfei, the commander of the 43rd Army, subconsciously retreated a little. The undead's method of torture had gone beyond the professional scope. He had a deep understanding of the acupuncture points of the human body. When he tortured people, he rarely saw blood, but the pain was enough to exceed the human body's endurance limit. Xiao Mohai fainted again and was awakened by the pain. Gu Qianchuan stroked the murderous weapon in his hand and said lightly, "If you regret it, you can tell me at any time. As long as you are willing to betray Li Tianlan, Zhongzhou State can also give you what Li Tianlan can give you." "He-he-ha." Xiao Mohai sneered. "You keep saying that you don't care about His Highness's intelligence, but in fact don't you want to know more? Gu Qianchuan, have you used all your confidence to brag?" Gu Qianchuan's face was cold. "Do you think I'm not Li Tianlan's opponent? Don't trick me. What do you think?" Xiao Mohai's voice was hoarse. "I have a murderous weapon in my hand. No one in Zhongzhou State can beat me. Lieutenant General, we still have time. You will tell me." He stepped back and glanced at the undead. "Entertain him well." "Understood." The undead laughed strangely. "Report." A loud and clear voice suddenly rang out. Gu Qianchuan looked back. A middle-level officer of the 43rd Army ran to Ouyang Pengfei and said something. Ouyang Pengfei's face changed. He quickly walked to Gu Qianchuan and stopped talking. "What's wrong?" Gu Qianchuan asked. "The news just came that the Iron Armor Army was defeated." Ouyang Pengfei took a deep breath and his tone was full of unconcealed fear. Gu Qianchuan suddenly turned his head and looked at the rear of the line of defense of the 43rd Army. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the endless yellow sand outside the line of defense. He was silent for a long time. The Iron Armor Field Corps. This was the fourth line of defense in the desert, and it was also the line of defense with the most military strength. The combat strength of the soldiers might not be the strongest, but the equipment of the field army was the most reasonable. The field army of more than 16,000 people was different from Huang Sha, who arrived in a hurry. They had sufficient time to mobilize before the battle. If they had weapons and built a defense system and patrol system, it would not be an exaggeration to say that the iron-armored field army was a shield that sealed off the desert. But now this shield had been pierced through by a sharp sword flying from the south. At a speed that no one had expected. Gu Qianchuan subconsciously looked at his watch. At 1:15 in the afternoon. How long had it been since the defeat of the Wasteland Special Forces? Trash. After a long time, Gu Qianchuan squeezed a sentence from his teeth. Ouyang Pengfei glanced at him and didn't say anything. How did the Nightmare Legion do it? Gu Qianchuan asked. He understood the strength of the Nightmare Legion and knew that they could tear through the first few lines of defense. However, no matter what, they shouldn't be that fast. Everyone went crazy. Ouyang Pengfei said with a wry smile. The Nightmare Legion gathered all the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace to form a sharp knife team. Lin Yuxian was the captain. The sharp knife team directly rushed into the center of the base of the Iron Armor Field Corps. The commander and 2 deputy commanders of the Iron Armor Field Corps were almost killed by a sword. It's impossible to be so fast. Gu Qianchuan said in a low voice. The Iron Armor Field Corps was a very mature field army. Even without the commander and deputy commander, the chief of staff and others could command. It was impossible for more than 1,000 people to defeat a corps of nearly 20,000 people so fast. The Iron Armor Field Corps did fight back, but the main force of the Nightmare Legion attacked the base desperately. They didn't think about defense at all. They just killed all the way to the end. They didn't care about casualties. They couldn't stop them at all. The muscles in the corners of Gu Qianchuan's eyes twitched fiercely. He said gloomily, "What are the casualties now?" There is no time to count, but the Iron Armor Field Corps has more than half of the casualties, and the Nightmare Legion has lost about 1/3. 1/3. This also meant that more than 500 elites of the Nightmare Legion had been left behind in the desert. Gu Qianchuan's chest moved up and down obviously. He suddenly found that he had no room to retreat. For Qin Fangqing, the exposure of the termination plan was equivalent to a desperate situation. In a desperate situation he could only make a last-ditch effort. Either he destroyed Emperor Dong's palace and Mount Dibing, or he would die without a burial place. So he would go all out. What about himself? Gu Qianchuan thought silently. For him, from the moment he appeared here, he also had to face a desperate situation. He still underestimated the reaction speed of Emperor Dong's palace. He also underestimated the determination of Emperor Dong's palace. The loss of 1/3 of the strength of the Nightmare Legion had made him a mortal enemy of Emperor Dong's palace. He had thought about whether to sacrifice himself to completely destroy Emperor Dong's palace to exchange for a bright future for Kunlun City. Now it seemed that he had no other choice. Even if everything ended here, it seemed that Li Tianlan would not let him go. Gu Qianchuan held the murderous weapon-setting sun tightly in his hand. This was his greatest confidence to stand there. How is the Nightmare Legion now? He asked suddenly. Still marching full speed. Ouyang Pengfei's face was a little pale. Gu Qianchuan nodded and sneered ferociously. In that case I will go there in person. His cell phone suddenly rang. Gu Qianchuan froze for a moment. He took out the phone and looked at the number. His face changed and he subconsciously answered the phone. Hello, Deputy Prime Minister Hua. Ouyang Pengfei subconsciously narrowed his eyes. Hua Xingyang, the Deputy Prime Minister of Zhongzhou State, called Gu Qianchuan at this time. Did the attitude of the academics change? He carefully observed Gu Qianchuan's expression. Gu Qianchuan's expression changed little by little, and then it changed faster and faster. Anger, astonishment, unwillingness, self-mockery and helplessness. All kinds of emotions flashed on his face. The phone call lasted for nearly 10 minutes. He took a deep breath and put down the phone expressionlessly. Your Highness. Ouyang Pengfei tentatively called. Gu Qianchuan did not respond to him for a long time. After Ouyang Pengfei called several times, he groaned and turned to leave. Where are you going, Your Highness? Ouyang Pengfei asked subconsciously. Gu Qianchuan paused and said coldly, back to the lounge. Ouyang Pengfei looked at his back, his eyes deep. He did not know what Deputy Prime Minister Hua said on the phone just now. But he did not forget that before the phone rang, Gu Qianchuan was going to deal with the Nightmare Legion in person. He did not want to wait for the Nightmare Legion to come. He wanted to go back and block the main combat force of Emperor Dong's palace. But now, He hesitated and wanted to report it to Huang Tong. Finally he gave up. Gu Qianchuan sat quietly in the lounge alone. His eyes wandered. No one knew what he was thinking. Hua Xingyang's phone call was very clear, straightforward and almost in order. He clearly told Gu Qianchuan that Lin Yuxian could not die. He could be seriously injured or fail, but Zhongzhou state must give the Lin clan an explanation. Hua Xingyang's words were very thorough. He clearly told Gu Qianchuan that Lin Yuxian was not alone in this matter. He flew from Tianan to Beijiang. The headquarters of the Lin clan strictly followed the rules of the clan from beginning to end. Without receiving Lin Yuxian's request for help, they did not say a word about all his actions, nor did they send help, nor did they put pressure on anyone. They still maintained a posture of being aloof from the world. However, the headquarters of the Lin clan did not move, but it did not mean that others did not. Lin Yuxian flew from Tianan to Beijiang. From the beginning of the war to the present, Zhongzhou state had received calls from several extremely powerful branch patriarchs of the Lin clan. They did not hide their overbearing and almost domineering attitude. They directly told Zhongzhou state that if Zhongzhou state could not give the Lin clan an explanation about Lin Yuxian, then the branches of the Lin clan all over the world would teach Zhongzhou state a lesson. If you did not give me an explanation, I would teach you a lesson. This was a very reasonable approach. And the Lin clan was fully capable of doing this. Zhongzhou state would not be frightened, but the existence of Lin Yuxian was indeed in line with the current needs of the academics. Therefore, when Hua Xingyang made this call, his wording was extremely tough. Gu Qianchuan's expression was a little strange. Now he was in the game and could not see the current situation clearly. However, Hua Xingyang's call seemed to indicate that the academics and the prince group had officially parted ways. Next, the academics did not need to cooperate with Emperor Dong's palace. He just needed to watch. Could the prince group and Qin Fangqing really withstand the pressure of the giant group and the southeast group? If Qin Fangqing could not withstand it, then Kunlun City must consider for itself. The same was true of Gu Qianchuan. As Hua Xingyang said, so far because he was not directly involved in all the losses of Emperor Dong's palace, he did not have a great relationship with them. The academics could guarantee that Li Tianlan's hatred would not be transferred to him. In other words, with this promise, Gu Qianchuan was temporarily safe. The academics had planned to withdraw. Why should he follow Qin Fangqing to the end? Gu Qianchuan thought about this question for a long time. Because of hatred? Because of jealousy? Because of fear? In the face of the rise of Emperor Dong's palace, what should Kunlun City do? Time passed little by little. Until the hurried feet. The footsteps sounded again. Ouyang Pengfei rushed into the lounge with a pale face. Gu Qianchuan glanced at him silently. Your Highness, the Nightmare Troop has officially fought with the Volcano Troop. Ouyang Pengfei said in a hurry. The Volcano Troop was also a field troop of Beijiang. Its number was less than the Iron Armor Troop, but it was one of the real main troops of Beijiang and the third line of defense of this action. Behind the Volcano Troop was the most powerful armed force of the Beijiang military region in the state of war, the Tiger Armor Troop. That was the second line of defense, but the firepower of the Tiger Armor Troop was enough to completely cover everything in the third line of defense. Although the two troops were two lines of defense, they were almost two forces in one. In their plan, when the physical strength of the Nightmare Troop declined, facing the experienced Volcano Troop and the super firepower of the Tiger Armor Troop, even if they could not completely defeat the Nightmare Troop, it was enough to cause at least 70% casualties to the Nightmare Troop. The rest would be dealt with by the trump card of the 43rd Army and Gu Qianchuan in the northwest of Zhongzhou State. However, the Nightmare Troop moved too fast. They directly rushed to the front of the Volcano Troop in a thunderous manner. Ouyang Pengfei became more and more uneasy. He looked at Gu Qianchuan and said in a hoarse voice, Your Highness, I think we should send some people to support the Volcano Troop. If Your Highness and the elites of Kunlun City can take action, it will be the best. A long night is fraught with trouble. It's better to completely extinguish the Nightmare Troop and Why are you panicking? Gu Qianchuan asked faintly. Ouyang Pengfei was stunned and looked at Gu Qianchuan with a confused face. King just wanted to take action. What happened? Gu Qianchuan waved his hand and said, You go to arrange the defense line first. I'll think about it. Ouyang Pengfei thought, What can you think about? But he did not dare to ask more. He hesitated and stepped out step by step. Gu Qianchuan sighed softly. It was not until this moment that he completely suppressed his inner killing intent. The future of Emperor Dong's palace was hard to imagine. Lin Youxian's future would also be incomparably brilliant. Li Tianlong and Lin Yuxian. Not to mention the Wang family of Beihai, these two people were destined to be the enemies of Kunlun City in the future. It could even be said that they were mountains that Kunlun City could not surpass. Today was the best opportunity to destroy them. But with the change of the attitude of the academics, everything had become impossible. Gu Qianchuan's thoughts gradually became clear. If he disobeyed the intention of the academics and destroyed Emperor Dong's palace today, the power of Qin Fangqing and the Prince Group would expand infinitely. But after all, it was impossible for them to dominate. What he would face next was the crazy revenge of the Giant Group and the Southeast Group, as well as the overt and covert suppression of some international forces. Under great pressure, Qin Fangqing's most likely choice was to sacrifice the rook to save the king. Who is the rook? Gu Qianchuan thought silently. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that he was the rook that would be abandoned. So was Kunlun City. He did not dare to follow Qin Fangqing to the end, so he could only learn from the academics and withdraw. So now this opportunity seemed good, but with the withdrawal of the academics, it was not realistic to destroy Emperor Dong's palace. This was definitely a hidden danger to the future of Kunlun City that could not be ignored. But it was much better than Kunlun City being completely abandoned immediately. If it stayed dormant, at least there was a chance. Gu Qianchuan shook his head and gradually calmed down. He took out his mobile phone and dialed a number. Your Highness. In the screams, the twisted and strange voice of the undead sounded on the phone. Let's stop for a while. Gu Qianchuan gritted his teeth and said slowly, bring Xiao Mohai here. In addition, prepare some medicine. Deal with him first. The undead was silent and said with some doubts, Your Highness. Do it. Gu Qianchuan growled. The undead's palm shook. He answered and directly hung up the phone. As soon as the phone was hung up, the bell rang again. Gu Qianchuan looked at the number and frowned. It was a completely strange number. He shook his head, too lazy to pay attention to it, and hung up. Then his mobile phone began to vibrate. It was a video communication request. There was only one word. Water. Thinking of the strange phone call just now, Gu Qianchuan's heart suddenly sank. He took a deep breath and pressed the answer button. The video on the mobile phone screen shook slightly for a moment. A man who seemed to be shrouded in starlight clouds sat there, holding a baby in his arms. It was a very strange feeling. Gu Qianchuan could not see the man's appearance, but he could clearly see the sleeping baby and even feel the man's bright smile. Your Highness Gu Qianchuan, the child is very cute. In the video, the man holding the child said with a smile, What's his name? Chapter 864. Gu Qianchuan quietly looked at the baby on the screen and was silent for a long time. At this moment his hands and feet were really cold and his heart sank to the bottom. He did not know how the other party found the child, but it did not matter. What mattered was the child's significance to him and even to Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan knew that there was something wrong with his body. When he was young, he was too indulgent and did not leave any children. The older he was, the lower the probability of childbirth. He could still leave descendants, but it was close to the theoretical possibility. This child was a great surprise for him as well as for some people in Kunlun City. Gu Qianchuan Gu Xingyun. Today the Gu family did not have so many branches. Gu Qianchuan represented the lineal descendants of the Gu family. Before the rise of Kunlun City, Gu Qianchuan's branch had the right to speak, while Gu Xingyun's branch was the latecomer. These two forces were restrained in Kunlun City, but it did not mean that the two sides were really close. Gu Qianchuan's child was undoubtedly the future hope of their lineal descendants. Gu Qianchuan had even recently considered taking Ning Yunshui and her son back to Kunlun City. But now the child was in the hands of a mysterious man. The lifeline of everyone in Gu Qianchuan's branch was held in his arms. How was the child exposed? What exactly went wrong? Gu Qianchuan was calm on the surface, but his heart was already in a mess. There were even some beads of sweat on his forehead. He stared at the screen, looking at the vague cloud and starlight on the screen. It was a seemingly subtle but almost all-encompassing domain, which was also a power that Gu Qianchuan was extremely afraid of. He did not know when such an expert appeared in the dark world. Just by looking at the opponent's domain, he knew that the opponent's realm was higher than his. His potential was exhausted, but he still had eyesight. The opponent's domain was extremely close to perfection. Not to mention him, even Gu Xingyun in his heyday might not be the opponent's opponent. At least Gu Xingyun's domain was not as good as the opponent's. The two of them looked at each other. In the video, the man shrouded in the domain still smiled and gently touched the face of the baby in his arms. "What do you want?" Gu Qianchuan finally spoke. He did not ask who the other party was, nor did he ask how the other party found the child. Instead, he went straight to the point and asked about the other party's purpose. "I naturally have something to ask of your highness, but I don't have any connections, so I could only come here. I hope your highness doesn't mind." The man chuckled and his voice was gentle. "Speak." Gu Qianchuan gritted his teeth. "Her highness should still be in the northern desert. I wonder how the war in the desert is going." The man's palm gently stroked the child's face, his fingers inadvertently brushing across the space between his eyebrows. Gu Qianchuan's body suddenly tightened. He stared at the screen, his eyes sharp and angry. Her highness raised her eyelids and glanced at him. Gu Qianchuan gasped a few times and sat back in his seat. He said with difficulty, "The nightmare troop has penetrated deep into the blockade line and is now breaking through the blockade of the volcano troop." Volcano troop? The hand that was caressing the child's face paused. He raised his head and seemed a little surprised. "How could it be so fast? The volcano troop should be your third or second line of defense. The ferocious Tiger Armored Corps has strong firepower, but it needs cooperation. They should not be far from the volcano troop. Are they coordinating the battle? Kiske, that is to say, as long as the nightmare troop breaks through the defense line of the volcano troop, they will face you in the 43rd Army next." Gu Qianchuan was shocked. At the beginning of the operation, the Beijiang military region had entered a state of strict information blockade. Except for a few giants in Zhengzhou state, few people could understand their specific arrangement in the desert. The other party explained everything on the defense line in one sentence. Where did he get the news? Was he familiar with Kunlun City or Beijiang? Or was he familiar with Zhengzhou state? "What's your name?" Gu Qianchuan forced himself to calm down and looked at the other party with a dignified face. The man sat there with the child in his arms and thought for a long time. He casually glanced at Gu Qianchuan and said casually, "What did you say?" "I asked you what's your name." Gu Qianchuan gritted his teeth. The other party's unconscious carelessness fully explained a problem. He did not take him seriously at all. The rising Emperor Dong's palace, the turbulent Mount Dibing, and the silent Lin clan made the general trend chaotic. Kunlun City could not find its position in the general trend. The acting governor of Kunlun City and the first elder, who were extremely noble a few years ago, were now being ignored by more and more people. What made Gu Qianchuan most sad was that it was not because he and Kunlun City had done anything wrong that caused such a situation. It was just because the short era that belonged to them was changing and was about to become the past. Gu Qianchuan gritted his teeth, full of unwillingness. The man nodded and said casually, "You can call me His Majesty." "You have a big tone." Gu Qianchuan's body shook and he sneered. In the Dark World, His Majesty had always been a specific title. It specifically referred to the invincible realm. For example, Wang Tianzong. Maybe there was a pope. But strictly speaking, the Vatican could not be regarded as a force in the Dark World. The Knights Templars under the Vatican were. In the entire Dark World, there was only one majesty who could be recognized by people, and that was the Sword Emperor. With the corresponding strength, I naturally have the corresponding pursuit. I'm not arrogant. On the contrary, I can guarantee that no one in the entire Dark World will be more cautious than me. He raised his palm. The baby in his arms floated up and slowly fell on the crib behind him. The starlight clouds on the screen slowly fluctuated. The muffled voice rang out faintly. The voice was extremely charming, soft, and urgent, which made people's imagination run wild. "Sorry, although it's a little immoral, from now on your woman belongs to me. As for the child, do you want it?" Gu Qianchuan's face turned red. Every time the voice in the video that had made him crazy, intoxicated, and obsessed sounded, it brought him unimaginable humiliation. From that voice he heard joy, indulgence, and desire. This bitch. Gu Qianchuan shivered all over. He never thought that one day his woman would make him a cuckold, and the distance was just across the screen. "Answer my question, child. Do you want it?" His Majesty looked at him quietly. He could feel Gu Qianchuan's embarrassment and anger, but he still spoke loudly. You will pay the price. Gu Qianchuan stared at him. Your men and that bitch will pay the price. I'm afraid it's difficult. His Majesty smiled. I don't want to talk big, but at present Kunlun City is really nothing in my eyes. Not to mention you, even if Gu Xingyun's strength recovers to the peak, he may not be a match for my subordinate. His calm voice was so true that people could not help but believe it. Gu Qianchuan was shocked and speechless. At his peak, Gu Xingyun was an expert who was infinitely close to the half-step invincible realm. If he was not a match for one of His Majesty's subordinates, what realm was his subordinate in? Even if he was not a match for one of His Majesty's subordinates, at least he was infinitely close to the peak invincible realm. Even in the whole dark world, such a person was a real giant, but he became His Majesty's subordinate. His Majesty. Gu Qianchuan was thinking about this title and became more and more frightened. He was silent for a long time. The charming voice was still ringing in his ears, becoming more and more urgent. Seemed to be about to reach the peak. In his ears, the voice was like a farewell and a mockery. So, Gu Qianchuan asked, are you humiliating me? I'm just telling you a fact to facilitate our next conversation. His Majesty said blandly, well, Your Highness, I can confirm that this is your son, but your woman is unlikely to belong to you in a short time. I can return the child to you as long as you promise me a request. He paused and laughed. As I said, I have something to ask. Say it. Gu Qianchuan's heart was in a mess. He glanced at His Majesty and said in a cold tone, I hope Your Highness can lead the army to destroy Emperor Dong's palace. His Majesty narrowed his eyes and said softly, Li Tianlon Lin Yuxian Li Beiyin Bai Yuming. Everyone in Emperor Dong's palace must die. Your Highness, you have tens of thousands of troops and murderous weapons. I believe you can do this. Kill all the important figures in Emperor Dong's palace. I will return the child to you. Gu Qianchuan's palm, which was about to drink tea, suddenly shook and the tea splashed out. He raised his head in astonishment. Are you King crazy? That's what I want. His Majesty's tone was calm and almost indifferent. Don't you think it's a pity not to take advantage of such a good opportunity? You have the setting sun in your hand. Even Li Tianlon is not your opponent. After killing Li Tianlon, your strength is enough to kill Lin Yuxian. Tens of thousands of troops are enough to destroy the Nightmare Corps. This is my requirement. Now the elites of Emperor Dong's palace who enter the desert, no matter who they are, must die. If you can't do it, I will kill your son and let you have no descendants. You are the Prime Minister's man. Gu Qianchuan seemed to be too shocked and his tone became a little numb. There is indeed cooperation, but it is my own interest to destroy Emperor Dong's palace. His Majesty said lightly. Gu Qianchuan nodded and suddenly said, What do you think I should choose? His Majesty frowned. I can indeed kill Li Tianlon and destroy Emperor Dong's palace. But then, just before you, I received the order from the academics. If I take action now, I will be openly disobeying the order. What will happen to Kunlun City? What will happen to me? Gu Qianchuan asked. Kunlun City will be fine. After all, you are not the city governor of Kunlun City. Although Gu Xingyun is seriously injured, his accumulation over the years is enough for him to deal with all this. As for you, His Majesty was silent. So, you want me to commit treason? Gu Qianchuan looked at His Majesty with a complicated tone. More than 20 years ago, the Li family fell to the bottom because of Li Guangtu's treason. More than 20 years later, would Kunlun City also fall apart because of Gu Qianchuan's treason? Everything was like a reincarnation. Don't think too much. Now, whether it is the academics Chen Fangqing or the Wang family of Beihai, they can't care about Kunlun City. You may not die if you commit treason. I can give you a choice. His Majesty said quietly. Choice. Gu Qianchuan sneered. For example? For example, be my fifth follower. I can save your life and try my best to improve your martial arts realm. I can also cooperate with Kunlun City to restabilize its position. Believe me, I can do this. Gu Qianchuan looked hesitant. Because everything His Majesty said was so good that it was somewhat unrealistic. He originally wanted to kill Li Tianlon, but he did not want to die, so he had been struggling. After receiving the order from the academics, he suppressed his unwillingness. What about now? If His Majesty's guarantee was effective, He would kill Li Tianlan and Lin Yuxian and get rid of the future threat to Kunlun City. At this time no one had time to care about Kunlun City. Gu Xingyun could relatively calmly resist the storm after his treason. He would not die. After becoming His Majesty's follower, he would improve his martial arts realm. With His Majesty's strong support, Kunlun City's status in the Dark World would rise and eventually become the real national defense force of Zhou State. And all of this only required him to disobey orders once. Or it was a reputation for treason. As long as he dared to disobey the order of the academics and destroy Emperor Dong's palace with the reputation of treason, all this could really be achieved. In this matter, Qin Fangqing would certainly support him. In the future, when Li Huaqing and Hua Xingyang retired, it was not impossible for him to take off the hat of treason and return to Zhou State. To be honest, if killing Lin Yuxian and Li Tianlan was only the price, Gu Qianchuan could accept it without hesitation. But he always felt that there was a trap. "Why should I believe you?" he asked suddenly. "This is cooperation, Your Highness. You are now a key figure who can change the future situation. If you make a decision, I can guarantee that the whole Dark World will be different in the future. It will be our world. I need you to change the situation. I need a follower who is strong enough and an ally who is strong enough." A short and seductive scream came from the screen. The storm officially stopped. Gu Qianchuan's mouth twitched fiercely and he did not speak. The sound of footsteps rang out from the screen. A steady voice chuckled and said, "Your Majesty." His Majesty nodded and looked at Gu Qianchuan. "As a sincerity of cooperation, I can show you part of my strength." The phone screen turned and Moraid's face appeared on the screen. He was naked with sweat beads and a small ambiguous red mark on his chest. "This is my first follower. You should know him." Because of the shock, Gu Qianchuan's body became a little stiff. Of course he knew Moraid. The former deputy commander of the Holy Disarmament Corps had exposed his strength that was infinitely close to the peak of the invincible realm in the chaos of Eastern Europe. Now he had left the Holy Disarmament Corps and was in charge of the Knights Templar of the Vatican. He was almost the top expert in Europe. How could he be His Majesty's follower? Gu Qianchuan suddenly thought of himself. If he also agreed to His Majesty's request, he would be the fifth follower. Moraid was the first and he was the fifth. Who are the other three? One of my followers has died. In addition to Moraid, there are two other followers, both of whom are in the invincible realm and have their own strength. I need to expand my influence. You and Kunlun City are absolutely heavyweight targets for me. Do you know what this means? Gu Qianchuan was silent for a long time. At this moment no one knew what he was thinking. His eyes gradually turned blood red and he became incomparably crazy. "I see," he said, "protect my son." He hesitated, finally lowered his head and whispered, "Your Majesty." His Majesty laughed. There seemed to be a demon baring its fangs and brandishing its claws in the starlight cloud. He laughed and nodded. Happy cooperation. The video was hung up. In the sound of footsteps, the undead dragged Xiao Mohai, who was somewhat out of shape, in. "Your Highness, do you want to treat him right away?" the undead asked softly. Gu Qianchuan glanced at him and said faintly, "Drag him out, hang him up and play with him slowly." The undead. Xiao Mohai. Both of them cursed in their hearts at the same time. In the sound of hurried footsteps, Ouyang Pengfei rushed in again. "Your Highness." Gu Qianchuan slowly got up and said in a calm voice, "Needless to say, the 43rd Army, listen up." "Yes." Ouyang Pengfei subconsciously straightened up. "Immediately transfer some elites to the volcano force with me. I'll do it myself. This farce should end." Gu Qianchuan said slowly. At this moment he finally made a decision. An extremely crazy decision. Chapter 865. The invincible edge of the Nightmare Army finally stagnated a little when it encountered the Volcano Field Army. Major General Yang Shaoxiong, the commander of the Volcano Army, was not a famous general of Zhou State, but he was the most standard soldier of Zhou State. 43 years old this year, he was one of the key generals trained by the Prince Group. But strictly speaking, his character was far purer than his standpoint. He was iron-blooded, tough, resolute, silent and calm. He had everything a soldier should have, but he didn't have anything a soldier shouldn't have. Because of this, although he was born in the Prince Group, he received countless praises in the military. Everyone, including Dongqing Wudi, had a very positive impression of him. Yang Xiaoxiang was one of the few non-members of the giant group who had entered the Border Control Corps and was eventually recommended by Dongqing Wudi to the army headquarters. Yes, Yang Xiaoxiang was a key general of the Prince Group, but it was the giant group that helped him cross the threshold from a colonel to a general. Therefore Yang Xiaoxiang had always respected Dongqing Wudi, but that was all. Just like how he also respected the leaders of the Prince Group. From a grassroots officer to a major general of Zhongzhou state, his purity hadn't changed at all. He didn't get married and he had no children. The Volcano Field Army was everything to him. He wouldn't welcome them, flatter them, or express any opinions that had nothing to do with the Volcano Army. Even inside the Prince Group he didn't have much sense of existence, but his existence was really reassuring. It seemed that he had never cared about the existence of groups or factions. As a soldier, the word "obey orders" ran through his entire military life. At the most critical moment, people like Yang Xiaoxiang were undoubtedly the most reliable and trustworthy people. Therefore the entire Beijiang military region had high hopes for Yang Xiaoxiang and the Volcano Army. And the Volcano Army didn't let the Beijiang military region down. This field army, which was more disciplined than anything else, directly charged at the Nightmare Army in an unimaginably decisive manner, knowing that it was unlikely to stop the Nightmare Army. The whole army charged. Take the initiative to attack. When the first Volcano Legion scout died in the hands of the Nightmare Legion, the entire Volcano Legion was like a raging tide that swept over in an instant. Artillery fire poured down from the ferocious tiger-armored legion behind the Volcano Legion, burning the sky and shaking the desert. Amidst the earth-shattering roars, countless troops rushed over and dispersed the Nightmare Legion, which was only left with a little more than 1,000 people. Cannon fire, frost, lightning, raging fire. Blood and corpses splattered in every corner of the desert like an explosion. Lin Yuxian was covered in blood from head to toe, and the blood splashed into his eyes. His pupils were already blood red and there were enemies everywhere in his sight. The dagger team formed by them was the strongest point of the entire Nightmare Legion, and the Volcano Legion also focused on attacking this point. The other party's unyielding choice completely represented his determination to do whatever it took. All the soldiers close to Lin Yuxian were smashed by the sword energy. But before the broken bodies fell, more people had rushed up with their own bodies, layer by layer. A large number of soldiers madly attacked the pseudo-domain formed by the dagger team of the Nightmare Legion. Artillery fire roared in the rear, and Lin Yuxian was unable to move for a while. He was still killing. But thousands of people pushed over together in front of him. Every step he took he had to step on a lot of blood and corpses. The Nightmare Legion began to suffer continuous casualties under the almost crazy attack. Lin Fengting and others were daggers. When this dagger was surrounded, the forces at the back would definitely hesitate and casualties would be unavoidable. The formation is in chaos. The existence of the pseudo-domain isolated most of the sound, but a small amount of sound that penetrated in was still deafening. Li Baitian looked back in the sky full of blood. The Nightmare Legion, which did not have many people, was still falling down quickly. One of the elites of the Legion was directly pulled out by the soldiers of the Volcano Legion. The soldiers almost all over the mountain rushed over like ants. Shrill screams accompanied by blood rang out. The swarming ants quickly decreased, and the elites of the Legion never stood up again. This won't work. The other brothers are surrounded. If we can't rush over, we will all be annihilated in the end. Let's support first. Let's gather people and push over together. Fairy Tail's voice was a little sharp. He was a newly promoted high-level official in Emperor Dong's palace, and his strength was relatively weak. At this time he was already injured. You and Xiaoyu are in charge of support. Gather people and be careful. The sword light kept moving. Lin Fengting, who frowned, directly gave the order. Fairy Tail and Yi Huayu nodded at the same time. I'll go find the nearby commander and kill him first. Li Baitian's voice was a little cold. It's useless. Bai Yoming's voice sounded. The Volcano Legion is the trump card field legion of the Beijiang military region. In this legion, discipline is more important than anything else, especially on the battlefield. Such a legion is the most thorough in carrying out orders. The sword energy in his hand gathered into a shocking sharpness, and finally turned into a beam of light that shot straight ahead. Wherever the beam of light passed, the human wall dozens of meters ahead suddenly broke. Blood and flesh splattered in the air. In the next second, the human wall was blocked by the people of the Volcano Legion, and they continued to rush up. Countless attacks hit the pseudo-domain in front of them crazily. Without the real invincible realm, the domain was not perfect at all. A large number of attacks fell and the pseudo-domain was turbulent. It seemed that it would be broken in the next second. Bai Yuming carefully looked at the soldiers in front of her. Her somewhat enchanting but endlessly sharp eyes had complicated emotions. In her sight, there were one ferocious and fierce face after another, with undisguised killing intent and fear of death. All of this eventually turned into a ferocity that was almost irrational. They desperately rushed up and fell down. After their corpses were trampled to pieces, more attacks hit the domain again. After the fear exceeded the limit, there was only madness that was close to fanaticism. Bai Yuming narrowed her eyes and whispered, "In their eyes we are the real enemy. Under such circumstances the only order they receive is to charge. It makes no sense to kill the commander." "Sister Bai, do you have any suggestions?" Lin Yuxian suddenly asked. "No." Bai Yuming whispered, "The real war is originally a head-on confrontation." "You're right." Lin Yuxian was silent for a while. The real war is originally a head-on confrontation. In this case, an extremely clear sword chime suddenly appeared in the extremely chaotic battlefield. The scarlet sword light rushed into the crowd in an instant with a lot of blood. Flesh and blood flew. Lin Yuxian's firm voice resounded through the desert. "Nightmare Legion, charge." Charge. This time it was a real charge. He was not thinking about the defense line. He was not thinking about the distance. He was not thinking about the physical strength. He was not thinking about the victory or defeat, life or death. Go all out. Charge. They met on a narrow road. Boom. In the violent roar, the entire Nightmare Legion completely broke out. They did not reserve their physical strength for the final battle. Everyone showed their strongest state. The fire was monstrous. There were flames everywhere on the yellow sand. Huge ice thorns were constantly condensing in the fire. Kill. In the roar that went straight to the sky, the remaining Nightmare Legion seemed to have completely lost their minds. They joined Emperor Dong's palace and joined this battlefield. Now there was no way back. As Lin Yuxian said, if they won they would be heroes. If they lost they would be sinners. So, they could only move forward. There was no need to think about the final battle. They had to pass through the Volcano Legion in front of them first. The fire was flying. Everyone in the Nightmare Legion was breaking out. Under the desperate attack of the soldiers, a platoon leader of the Nightmare Army suddenly opened his hands. The extremely hot flames were like two torrents. The high temperature of the desert was originally a hell for experts in the fire-flaming realm. The torrents surged wildly with extremely heavy power, covering a radius of nearly 20 meters in an instant. Cooperate. The squadron leader bellowed furiously. There was no need for him to speak at all. The two team members who had gradually separated from him had already taken action at the same time. The flames flowed and the cold ice wall surrounded them from all directions. The ice wall enclosed all the flames and became thicker and thicker. Under the cruel and decisive cooperation, all the soldiers and officers of the Volcano Legion within a radius of 20 meters were surrounded by the ice wall. A large piece of fire was burning their flesh and burning the ice layer. The ice layer gradually melted and merged with the burnt flesh and blood. The flames turned into liquid like magma. In the scream, a team member died in the siege of the Volcano Legion. The squadron leader, who had created a pool of magma, suddenly roared and slapped the ice wall in front of him. Boom! The thick ice wall suddenly exploded, and the magma-like flames inside sprayed everywhere. A large number of soldiers fell to the ground, howling in the flames, and were overwhelmed and trampled by the increasingly chaotic crowd. The squadron leader, who had done his best, did not hesitate. A huge flaming broadsword appeared in his hand. The long flaming broadsword danced wildly in the crowd. He rushed straight in one direction, trying to gather with his team members. Go to hell, all of you go to hell. The roar sounded in every corner of the battlefield. The squadron leader's eyes were red. He waved his broadsword madly and kept moving forward. You go to hell too. A low sneer suddenly sounded behind him. An expert in the fire-flaming realm of the Volcano Legion in an ordinary soldier's uniform approached the squadron leader and punched him hard in the back. Puff. Blood spurted out of his mouth. His body rose into the air, and the expert of the Volcano Legion followed him like a shadow. He jumped into the air and stepped hard on the squadron leader's head. The squadron leader stared at him with a look of unwillingness. The raging fire was still burning. The sun and the raging fire sprinkled on the broken ice and yellow sand, reflecting some messy light. Space seemed to flicker in front of his eyes. It was like a very faint sword light. Faint, empty, but it seemed to be everywhere. The sword light flashed in front of his eyes quickly. In the eyes of the squadron leader, the fire-flaming realm expert who had jumped into the air and successfully attacked him was cut into two pieces silently like tofu in front of the sword light. The sword light passed by in an instant and his body was cut into two pieces silently. The surroundings seemed to be quiet for a moment. When the squadron leader's body fell to the ground. On the desert battlefield, there seemed to be an endless amount of sword light suddenly flying up. There was no blood, no wailing. In the seemingly blurry space, there were subtle but extremely fast sword light everywhere. The sword light was so light but it was extremely fatal. The squadron leader stood where he was, his body trembling and his face was fanatical. In his eyes, the soldiers of the Volcano Legion, who seemed to be endless, were falling down one by one. Armed to the teeth and equipped with riot shields, everything turned into a piece of paper in front of the tiny sword light. Penetrated, torn and crushed. In the silence, only the sword light shone. North, south, east and west. Fast. It was so fast that no one could react. In everyone's eyes, there seemed to be countless swordsmen flashing in different directions at the same time, and scrupulously harvesting lives. Countless experts of the Volcano Legion wanted to fight back, but they couldn't keep up with the speed of the sword light. Ice-condensing realm experts died with one touch and fire-flaming realm experts died with one touch. At this moment the sword light seemed to be divided into countless parts. It appeared where it should be. The faint but extremely sharp sword light directly interrupted the attacking rhythm of the Volcano Legion. A large number of elites of the Nightmare Legion who were besieged only saw the sword light flash, and the next moment, the enemies who besieged them had become a mass of flesh and blood. This time was too short. Maybe it was 1 second, maybe it was just a few seconds, but the sword light in the twinkling of an eye suppressed the light of the whole battlefield. Boom! Amidst the sudden explosion, countless sword lights suddenly merged into one. Countless thunderbolts instantly expanded and exploded like a bomb. Seeing this scene, the soldiers of the Volcano Legion subconsciously stopped. On the other hand, the Nightmare Legion burst into cheers. Everyone knew what this explosion meant. He was one of the only 2 experts at the peak of the thundershocking realm in the Volcano Legion. He was the vice commander of the Volcano Legion, codenamed Thunder Snake. His existence brought a lot of trouble to the Nightmare Legion. The shining sword light approached from afar and directly came to Thunder Snake. One sword, the peak of the thunder-shocking realm, and one touch would kill. The morale of the Nightmare Legion soared. Everyone knew this sword. Even if they hadn't seen it with their own eyes, they had at least heard of it. In the few years of development of Emperor Dong's palace, this sword could be said to be really famous in Tianan. This was the last move of the Great Void Sword of Mount Shu. Supreme Great Void. Only when one entered the peak of the thundershocking realm could he really control the Great Void Sword. The dazzling sword energy converged in one place layer by layer. The energy of Thunder Snake kept surging under the guidance of the sword. Explosions kept happening around him, and the explosions swallowed all the soldiers of the Volcano Legion around him. The incorporeal sword light stood beside him and gradually became clearer. Li Baitian's figure appeared in front of everyone. The Great Void Sword trembled violently in his hand, and the sound of the sword kept ringing. He raised his long sword, and the almost invisible sword intent kept surging in his hand. He pointed his sword at the Volcano Legion that didn't retreat but became more and more crazy. He said with indifferent eyes, "Kill them, go all out." At this point there was no need to save any strength. After killing through this line of defense, they would face the 43rd Army in Guqianchuan. It was no longer important to save strength. The Nightmare Legion assembled once again. Li Baitian raised the Great Void Sword in his hand. Bang! An extremely dull sound suddenly appeared on the whole battlefield. It was the sound of breaking. The whole space seemed to shake violently. On the front line, without Li Baitian's sword energy, the pseudo-domain jointly built by the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace was directly broken in the face of the continuous artillery fire. Behind the Volcano Legion, The ferocious tiger-armored corps poured the artillery fire directly toward the Nightmare Legion. It was like the end of the world.